Chapter 1065. He had always been the one tricking others, but this time, he was tricked by Bai Su. The fragrance of lilies was light and elegant, and the scent was very faint. After a long time, other than people like Rui who had sharp senses and a nose better than a dog's, it was impossible for ordinary people to smell it. He thought that Bai Su had found her conscience and was grateful to him, but his kindness was not reciprocated. How petty could a woman be? Even if he had a clear conscience, he still felt guilty when he was stared at by these 5 pairs of eyes. Rui, come with me. He had to prove his innocence no matter what. Rui knew that Bai Su liked women. Mississippi Lu had sharp eyes, so how could she fall for such a clumsy trick? He and Rui walked to the courtyard outside, and Bai Su was still sparring with Shanning. Ahem, ahem, Li walked to her side and was almost choked to death by the strong perfume smell. This time, it was the smell of roses. Mississippi Lu looked at him, waiting for him to explain. Li looked at Bai Su, waiting for her to explain. It was still the smell of lilies just now, and she had sprayed so much rose perfume in less than 5 minutes. Wasn't it a waste? Shanning walked over, held Mississippi Lu's wrist, and said, Sister Rui, can you spar with me? My royal sister said that you are very good at martial arts, and there are still many things I don't understand that I want to ask you. A fresh and elegant smell came from her body. It was the smell of lilies. Mississippi Lu looked at Li, then turned to look at Shanning, and said, Okay, come with me to the courtyard inside. Cute girls were always popular, and even Mississippi Lu was no exception. Shanning was very popular when she was playful, and when she was obedient, she was even more popular. The one who was not popular was the small-chested, narrow-minded, cunning Bai Su. Bai Su glanced at him and said indifferently, Consider yourself lucky this time. People with small chests don't have the right to speak. Li also glanced at her and walked back into the courtyard. Bai Su's eyes were wide open, and her chest was heaving up and down. It looked like it was a little bigger. Shanning made everyone happy, especially after Li Xian went to the mountain. Without that eyesore, the atmosphere in the prince's mansion became much more harmonious. Li returned to his study and picked up a few letters. The letters were about the problems the fringe was facing. After reading the 2 letters, Mississippi Lu, who seemed to have just taken a shower, walked in with her wet hair. That perfume just now was Bai Su's, right? Ah. Bai Su likes to use lily-scented perfume. Mississippi Lu tied up her hair and stood in front of the mirror. She said, Don't worry, I won't misunderstand. Bai Su won't like you, and you won't like her. Why? Li was puzzled. He could understand why Bai Su wouldn't like him. After all, they had different sexual orientations. It was just like how he wouldn't like Fang or Li Xian. Why was Mississippi Lu so sure that he wouldn't like Bai Su? Was it because she had small breasts? Because you don't like small breasts. Rui's words made it seem as if he had some discrimination against women with small breasts. Although there was a reason for this, it only accounted for 80%. She was narrow-minded, cunning, and unfeminine, which accounted for the remaining 20%. As drunk Mo's due date approached, the atmosphere in the prince's mansion became tense. Even Li Duan was much quieter than before. Several times, he ran over to ask him and Rui if second mother was going to give birth to a younger brother or sister. The professionally trained delivery team was preparing 24 hours a day and resting in shifts. When Xiaotsui ran over and said that drunken Mo was about to give birth, the tense atmosphere in the prince's mansion reached its peak. Rui held his hand tightly. She was even more nervous than when she gave birth to her own child. Li wanted to go in to accompany her, but Rui's attitude was very firm. She said that it was unlucky for a man to enter the delivery room, but drunk Mo didn't agree. Li could only be superstitious. He didn't dare not to be superstitious. It was already a mystery that he could appear in this world. If he questioned the existence of gods at this time, who knew if he would be punished? After a long time, a midwife opened the door and came out. She smiled and said, Congratulations, Prince. It's a little princess. Both mother and daughter are safe. Reward. Li breathed a sigh of relief and strode into the room. Yesterday was a joyous day in the prince's mansion. All the maids and servants were rewarded with a year's salary. All the servants who had worked in the prince's mansion knew that the prince was very generous to the servants. The salary they received was definitely not the number written on the surface. It was often more than 10 times or even dozens of times higher. It was said that the first midwife who came out yesterday to report that she was safe received a reward of 1,000 taels of silver. She was so excited that she fainted on the spot. When would the third madam be pregnant, and when would the princess be pregnant again? It was really something to look forward to. Before one became a father, one would never understand what it was like to be a father. The eldest daughter of the Li family fell asleep. Lying next to drunk Mo, Li Duan stood by the bed with his hands behind his back, watching without blinking. He had a younger sister, and there would be someone to play with him in the future. Father said that he was the eldest brother, and he had to protect his younger sister in the future. As a man, he understood this even without father saying it. When his little sister grew up, he would be able to bring his little sister to play on the slide, swing, and buy her candied fruits and candied fruits. If there were any boys who used fake snakes to scare her, he would beat them up until they were looking for their teeth on the floor. Little Aunt had said that when he grew up, she would teach him martial arts. Little Aunt's martial arts were very powerful. She could beat father until he ran around everywhere. If he learned martial arts from her, he would definitely become as powerful as her. Li Yi looked at this pair of children and once again felt that the heavens had treated him well. He had a few beautiful wives and a pair of children. Compared to his previous life when he was forced to go on blind dates everywhere, his life now was much better. That kick was not in vain, and that fire was not in vain. Li Duan watched for a while and ran out. He wanted to find Little Aunt to teach him martial arts so that he could protect his younger sister. Drunk Mo leaned against the side of the bed and tilted her head. She looked at her daughter, who had not yet grown up, with a smile on her face. She had told Li Yi a long time ago that she hoped to have a daughter. She could draw, sing, and dance. Their daughter would inherit everything from her and become the little goddess of Luo Shui. The name of the young lady of the Li family was also something that she and Li Yi had discussed a long time ago. Whether it was a boy or a girl, there were a few names that could be chosen. In the morning, Li Yi and drunk Mo deliberated for a while and chose one from among them. Li Mu. Mu, meaning longing and attachment. Her name contained too much. Before he and drunk Mo got together, they had gone through hardships and twists and turns. From Qing and prefecture to the capital, from the capital to the Qi kingdom, they had gone around in circles before they finally had the happiness they had today. Drunk Mo had expended too much energy yesterday. After Li Yi coaxed her to sleep, he gently closed the door and walked into the yard. Rui sat alone at the stone table, looking into the distance. Li Yi walked over and sat beside her. He held her hand and asked in a low voice, "What are you thinking about?" Rui smiled and said, "Dwainer just went to find Rui. He said that he wanted to learn martial arts well so that he could protect his sister in the future." Li Yi shook his head and said, "He is still too young to endure that hardship. Let's wait for another 2 years. Let's see if he can persevere. I have also started practicing basic skills since I was 3 years old." As she spoke, she leaned on Li Yi's shoulder and murmured, "Can I have another child with my husband?" Because of her physique, it was difficult for Rui to get pregnant. The birth of Li Duan made Li Yi's legs feel weak even now. He held her waist and said softly, "Yes, really, really." Li Yi nodded and said, "My wife, don't worry. We have plenty of time." Chapter 1066. Li Yi wondered if it was in a woman's nature to forget her husband after giving birth. It was like this when Rui gave birth to Li Duan, and it was the same after Zui Mo gave birth to Li Mu. The young princess of the Li family, Li Mu, was now the apple of everyone's eye. At home, she was much more popular than Li Duan and himself. Li Duan wanted to learn Kung Fu from Mississippi Lu, so Mississippi Lu handed him over to Yang Liuqing for the time being. He swore to protect his sister, so he had to practice Kung Fu with tears in his eyes. Fortunately, although it was hard, he persevered. Li Duan was already 3.5 years old, so it would be good for him in the future if he could train his body a little. Women in confinement needed special care, so Li Yi had not been idle these days. He had taken into consideration both nutrition and taste. He had put in a lot of effort. Li Xian had been in the land of chaos, and he had sent a letter saying that he would be back tomorrow. This also meant that they would not stay in Shuzhou for long, and they would be returning to the capital. Although one less Li Xian in the capital was not a big deal, he was still the emperor. Even if he could not stay in the capital, he could not always wander outside, so Shanning had been in low spirits since yesterday. Li Yi thought for a long time, then looked at her and said, "If he doesn't want to go back, let him go alone." Shanning raised her head and smiled. She said, "Gathering and parting. When there is gathering, there will be parting, and when there is parting, there will be reunion. Parting is for a better reunion. There is mother, sister, and many things to do in the capital. I can't always be outside." Li Yi did not speak anymore. Shanning lowered her head and was silent for a while. Then she ran to the side, picked up a branch, and drew crisscross lines on the ground. She said, "Sir, let's play chess, beast chess." Beast chess was the first game that Li Yi taught her, and it was also the first game that she knew. It was taught by Li Yi to her, and after she carried it forward, it quickly became popular in the capital, especially among young children. She played very slowly and methodically. This made it difficult for Li Yi to use ultimate moves such as Little Dumbo, Tigger, and the universe's invincible celestial hound. Fortunately, he won and lost this time, and the probability of winning and losing was between 50 and 50. This made him even more sad. He knew that in chess, he would never have a chance to surpass Shanning in his life. He could not believe that she could actually win and lose one game, and she could not win one game more. As the game went on, even Bai Su, who was standing behind, saw it and looked at him with slight contempt. So the game of chess could not go on. He looked at the time, and it was almost time to prepare dinner. These days, Drunking's food was taken care of by him alone, including the ingredients, and he personally went to the market to pick the freshest. Shanning carried a small cloth bag and followed behind him, just like a little attendant. These days, except for sleeping in very few times, she would hardly leave his side more than 5 steps. If it were not for Bai Su also following behind, this must have been a flawless day. Su seemed to have made a breakthrough recently. Li Yi had not seen him for several days, but it did not matter. He just went out to buy vegetables, and he did not need a guru to escort him every time. What's more, although Bai Su had a small chest, a small butt, a small heart, and a lot of shortcomings, her advantages were also very obvious. 8th on the heaven list, she was definitely a qualified bodyguard. With Fang, in Yong County, she could almost do whatever she wanted. Coincidentally, they met Yang Fu and the others on the street. The old man with the surname Wang, Yang Fu, and a few guards, walked slowly on the street, talking to Yang Fu as they walked. In the past, old man Wang often asked him some questions, or talked about some things about the Jing kingdom. Later, for unknown reasons, he rarely came. Instead, when he was talking to Yang Fu about the way of the emperor, the latter often fell asleep on the table. Li Yi could understand Yang Fu, because the Prime Minister's voice had a unique charm, even he wanted to sleep when he heard it. "Your Highness Jiang of Silla." The old man with the surname Wang also saw him, and cupped his hands to salute him. Li Yi looked at him. "Prime Minister, this is..." The old man with the surname Wang cupped his hands and said, "Shuzhou used to be the poorest and most chaotic place in the Jing kingdom, but in just 2 years, it has become so prosperous and rich. This old man brought His Highness King Jing out to have a look, hoping that your highness can learn something from it." Li Yi looked at Yang Fu, and found that his eyes were staring at the fruit-candied haws on the street stalls, and there was a look of longing in his eyes. He felt that old man Wang was still a little too hasty. So what if he learned it? The reason why Shuzhou had become the Shuzhou it was now was not only because of its unique geographical advantage, but also because it was his territory, and he could do whatever he wanted. The Wu kingdom was still in someone else's hands. Even if Yang Fu learned it, it would be in vain. Li Yi bought a fruit-candied haw for Shanning and Yang Fu, and the longing and envy on Yang Fu's face disappeared. Just as he was about to wave goodbye to them, a group of carriages slowly drove over from afar. The man in the lead looked left and right, and suddenly walked over. He asked the old man with the surname Wang, "May I ask, old man, how do I get to the Yong County government?" The old man didn't answer, but looked at him and asked, "Are you from the Wu Kingdom?" Dodge. The man held the windmill with a kind smile on his face. However, when his hand was halfway through, a trace of viciousness quickly appeared on his face. His speed suddenly increased, and from the gap between his index and middle fingers, a bit of blue light shone out. Chapter 1067. While Yang Fu was frozen in place, Shou Ning kicked the man's hand away. The kindness on the man's face turned into ruthlessness. He suddenly withdrew his arm, and his fist, which was glowing with blue light, smashed toward her calf. Of course, he didn't have the chance. Bai Su sent him flying with a kick. With just one kick, he could no longer get up. The poisonous needle between his fingers fell to the ground, glowing blue in the sunlight. The merchant from the Wu Kingdom, who had asked the old man surnamed Wang for the direction of the county government, had one hand in the carriage, but he couldn't pull it out. He lowered his head and found a hand pressing his wrist. When he turned his head, the strong man next to the young man grinned at him and said with a smile, "What do you want?" Then everything went black, and he felt a great pain in his neck. He lost consciousness. The old man surnamed Wang instantly reacted and shouted, "Protect His Highness." Yang Fu had already been surrounded by a few guards who had accompanied him. The dozen or so people had already drawn their swords and sabers. Li Yi stood motionless while Bai Su protected Shou Ning. Old Fong was like a black bear, killing one person with each slap. His fighting style was so violent that normal people would not be able to withstand a single slap from him. This group of people could be considered to have some skills, but they were no match for Old Fong, who was a beast in human form. He was strong and fast, giving them no time to react at all. In just a few breaths, no one could even stand and speak. Since second granduncle's devilish training, Fong was the best weapon against enemies who weren't strong individually and had a large number of people. The old man surnamed Wang was relieved and hurriedly said, His Highness King Jing, His Highness is here." A voice came from behind. The old man surnamed Wang turned his head and saw the two guards next to King Jing lying on the ground, each holding one of their arms. Their faces were full of shock and disbelief. The other two bodyguards placed their weapons against the pale-faced imperial Prince Jing's neck. It was hard to guard against a thief in the family. Li looked at the old man surnamed Wang and said in disbelief, "There's a traitor among you." No matter how meticulous Shawning's observation was, no matter how brave Feng was, and no matter how powerful Bai Su was, they couldn't stand the fact that there was a traitor among Yang Fu's guards. Li Yi was a little disappointed. What kind of soldiers did his martial nephew have? There were only a few of them, and among them, there were even traitors planted by others to stab them in the back at critical moments. Old man Wang's expression changed greatly. He pointed at them and said with a trembling voice, We let His Highness escape last time in the Thorns Ridge. If we fail again this time, His Majesty will not let us off." A guard looked at the old man surnamed Wang and said, "Prepare 2 fast horses for us and send us to the Qi Kingdom. Otherwise, I will kill King Jing right now." The old man's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as he said angrily, "How dare you?" The man sneered and said, "I'm going to die either way. It's worth it if I can drag King Jing down with me before I die." Yang Fu's face was already pale and bloodless. He shouted, "No, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. Prime Minister, give them horses, give them horses." The old man surnamed Wang looked at Li Yi. Li Yi looked in Yang Fu's direction. That knife was on his neck and there was already a trace of blood. With just a light cut, Yang Luqing would have to rebel and become the empress. After thinking about it carefully, Li Yi hurriedly suppressed this immoral idea. He looked at the old man surnamed Wang and lightly shook his head. Shaking his head meant that it was too dangerous. If they weren't careful, they would have to let their princess become the empress, so he agreed to their conditions for the time being. The old man surnamed Wang clenched his teeth and said in a low voice, "Fine, I promise you, don't hurt King Jing." "Wait a moment." The guard looked left and right, then suddenly opened his mouth and said. He pointed at Shawning, who was protected by Bai Su, and said, "Let her come over." The old man surnamed Wang was startled. Li Yi narrowed his eyes slightly. Yang Fu, who had the knife on his neck, seemed to see a glimmer of hope. He shouted, "Yes, she is the princess of the Jing kingdom. She is more important than me, she is more important than me. Just tie her up. Let me go, let me go." The old man surnamed Wang's body swayed. He looked at Yang Fu as if he was looking at a stranger. His lips trembled, but he couldn't say a word. If it weren't for this little princess, King Jing would have been dead. How could he say such a thing? His body also began to tremble. His eyes dimmed and his face was ashen. The guard had just said it casually. He could only see that the girl was of noble status, but he didn't expect her to be so noble. If he tied her up, wouldn't their chances of escaping be greater? He pointed at Shawning again and said loudly, "Let her come over, or I will kill King Jing right now. If we die together. Then let's kill her." Li Yi walked over and took Shawning's hand. He said, "Let's go home. If we go home late, the fish won't be fresh." It was because the fish purchased by the residents wasn't fresh that he and Shawning came out to buy live fish. If the fish were dead, they would have to come out to buy it again. He looked back at Fong and said, "Don't forget to have someone clean the floor later." The two guards looked at him with a stunned and shocked expression. "Then kill him." This was King Jing, not some random cat or dog. How could he just kill him? If he killed King Jing, what reason could the princess and the others have to rebel? This person, how could this person do this? "You want to harm me, you want to harm me." Yang Fu's face became even paler. His face was full of despair. He shouted, "My royal sister will not let you go, my royal sister will not let you go." Li Yi sighed. He didn't sigh for Yang Fu, but for himself. He thought that Yang Fu was just a naughty and spoiled child. As long as he put in some effort, he would be able to bring him back to the right path. Obviously, he was too naive. The surrounding crowd had already retreated when the group of people took action. They were watching from afar. You. One of the guards pointed at Li Yi and said angrily, "Don't think that I don't dare to do it." Li Yi waved his hand. "You do it. I'm watching." The two of them were stunned. They didn't know whether to advance or retreat. Puff. After two strange sounds, the two of them fell to the ground at the same time. There were two swallowtail darts stuck between their eyebrows. Yang Fu also fell to the ground. There was a stench coming from his lower body. Li Yi looked at Bai Su, who was holding two darts in her hands. Bai Su turned to look at him at the same time. He swore in his heart that he would never laugh at her for having a small chest again. The Yamen runners began to separate the crowd and gathered here. Fong pointed at the dozen people on the ground and said, "Take them back to the county office first." Then he pointed at the two people with darts between their eyebrows and said, "Take the bodies away." The old man surnamed Wang came to his senses. His eyes were dull. He looked at King Jing, who was paralyzed on the ground and had lost control of his bowels. He walked over and slowly squatted down. He didn't mind it. He picked him up and walked toward the crowd step by step. Ouch! The crowd dispersed. Hearing the sound, Li Yi hurriedly turned his head and looked at Shawning. He asked with concern, "What's wrong?" She frowned and whispered, "I was careless just now and sprained my ankle. Go back and ask Sister Rui to take a look at it." Li Yi squatted down to check and found that it was not serious. It was just a little swollen. He must have sprained his ankle. He turned his back to her and said, "Get up." Shawning blushed. She lay on Li Yi's back and put her arms around his neck. She said with a red face, This is not good." He had never seen anyone so happy after spraining their ankle. Li Yi tilted his head and looked at her. Shawning put her arms around his neck and asked, "Sir, I sprained my ankle. Can I not go back to the capital right away?" "Go back to the capital? Let's recover first." Li Yi turned his head and said angrily. She lay on Li Yi's back with a happy smile on her face. She felt that the pain in her ankle was not as bad anymore. Li Yi carried Shanning on his back. Chapter 1068. Li Yi didn't expect Bai Su, who could only be considered half a woman, to care about her figure. He generously told her the secret recipe of the breast enhancement soup. He didn't have to worry that the effect wouldn't make her angrier. After all, this was personally tested by Mingzu. Bai Su wasn't even as good as Mingzu in the past, so the effect would definitely be more obvious. No matter how stingy this woman was, after drinking his soup, she wouldn't stab him with a dart, right? Shanning's ankle was really sprained, but it wasn't too serious. Rui took a look and massaged her for a while. She told her that as long as she had a good rest, she would recover in 3 to 5 days. Who would have thought that after Rui warned her for a while, she couldn't help but get out of bed. As a result, she tripped at the door and sprained her ankle even more seriously. This time, it wouldn't be a matter of 3 to 5 days. She would have to rest in bed for at least a month to ensure that she would recover to the same state as before she was injured and not leave any future problems. As her injury worsened, she seemed to be even happier. When Li Yi walked out of her room, he actually heard her humming a tune. Yang Fu had already taken a shower and used a lot of soap. There wasn't a trace of the stench on his body anymore. There wasn't a single guard in the room, so he felt more at ease. He was afraid of guards now. Prime Minister Wang stood in the middle of the hall. There was a brown stain on his body that emitted a foul smell. The smell made Yang Fu want to vomit, but he couldn't vomit because it was the smell he got when the Prime Minister carried him back after he had lost control of his bladder. He still hadn't recovered from today's events. He had nearly died when the man had handed him the windmill. When the guard had put his sword to his throat, he had nearly died. He touched his neck. There was a bloodstain on it, and it still hurt a little when he touched it. If the knife was a little sharper, his head wouldn't be on his neck anymore. Fortunately, everything was over. That man actually let those 2 traitors kill him. When his imperial sister returned, he must tell her about this. Your Highness. The old man surnamed Wang ignored the stench on his body and took a few steps forward. Prime Minister. Yang Fu raised his head and looked at him. He didn't know why, but although the Prime Minister was very calm at this moment, he felt that the Prime Minister was very scary, very scary. Prime Minister Wang walked in front of Yang Fu and slowly sat down. He asked, Your Highness, do you still remember the way of the Emperor that I taught you? I remember everything. Yang Fu was overjoyed and immediately said, To be an emperor, one man is the heavens. With great power in hand, one must judge the situation, make the best use of everything, make the best use of people, have a broad heart to accommodate the world, and have a broad mind to accommodate all rivers. As an emperor, there is no need for him to be knowledgeable. He may not be able to compose good poems or write beautiful essays, but he must have the spirit of an emperor. He secretly rejoiced that he had memorized this part. Who knew that Prime Minister Wang would test him at this time? The old man nodded and asked, Does your Highness know what the spirit of an emperor is? Yang Fu was startled. He then shook his head and said, The Prime Minister didn't teach me. The old man thought about it and let out a long sigh. He slowly said, I indeed didn't teach you. But your Highness must remember that some things don't need to be taught. If you don't teach me, how would I? Yang Fu secretly muttered in his heart, but his face revealed an enlightened expression. He said, Yang Fu will definitely follow the Prime Minister's teachings and learn the way of the Emperor. The old man shook his head and said, Your Highness doesn't need to learn these things in the future, really? Yang Fu raised his eyebrows and was overjoyed. The way of the Emperor was too long for him to memorize. It would be best if he didn't have to learn it in the future. Your Highness doesn't need to complete your daily homework in the future. Do whatever you want to do. The old man waved his hand and didn't look at Yang Fu again. He turned around and left. Yang Fu was still standing there in a daze. In the future, he didn't need to learn anything and could do whatever he wanted. This was supposed to be a happy thing, but why did he feel a chill in his heart? Yang Liuqing quickly walked into the courtyard and hurriedly asked, "Is the Prime Minister and Yang Fu okay?" She only heard that Prime Minister Wang and Yang Fu were assassinated outside today, so she hurried back. Wei Liang, who was waiting here, immediately said, "Your Highness, the Prime Minister and King Jing are fine." Yang Liuqing asked, "Where are they?" "King Jing is in his room." Wei Liang said, "The Prime Minister is also in his room." The Prime Minister said that if your Highness comes back, please go and see him first. Yang Liuqing nodded and quickly walked to a courtyard. She knocked on the door. After a long time, a hoarse voice came from the room. "Come in." Yang Liuqing pushed the door and entered. Prime Minister Wang was standing in the room. He was wearing an official robe and a high crown. He knelt down in front of her and said in a deep voice, "I'm sorry, the former emperor." "I'm sorry, Your Highness." Yang Liuqing was shocked and hurried forward to help him up. She said, "Yang Fu is not injured." "Prime Minister, you don't have to blame yourself, I'm not referring to today's assassination." If he wasn't a child, or if he wasn't Yang Liuqing's younger brother, Li Yi would let him know the price of doing wrong and saying wrong things. However, he didn't have the slightest interest in Yang Fu. This child was already useless. Whether they wanted to live in seclusion in the countryside or wanted to continue to rebel and support Yang Fu as the emperor, it had nothing to do with him. He had to look after Shawnee. He was worried that she hadn't recovered from her foot injury and would jump out of bed again. In the afternoon, Old Man Wang came to find him. At that time, he was massaging Shawnee's sprained foot. She was giggling because of the itch. The massage technique was taught to him by Bai Su. She said that she didn't want to owe others a favor. In the martial arts world, it's not a burden to have more skills. Looking at the horoscope to predict one's luck, relaxing the muscles and blood, massaging to set the bones, rebellion. These skills, it was better to learn one more. Who knew when it would come in handy? Old Man Wang knocked on the door and stood at the door. He asked, "Your Highness Jiang of Silla, can I have a word with you?" Shawnee smiled every time she massaged her foot. Li Yi had long wanted to run away from the door. Those who didn't know would think that he was abducting an ignorant girl inside. Li Yi walked into the courtyard and sat beside the stone table. Old Man Wang sat opposite him. "Your Highness Jiang of Silla and the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom, Li Emingzu, must be very close, right?" Li Yi looked at Old Man Wang. He didn't know what he meant by this question. He waved his hand and said modestly, "Just a so-so." Old Man Wang looked at him and asked, "Then what does Jiang of Silla think about Princess Duan Rong compared to the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom?" Li Yi thought for a while and shook his head regretfully. In terms of appearance, at this level, there was actually no difference between them. It could only be said that each had their own merits. Mingzu was the domineering empress type. Although Yang Liuqing was a princess, she was the pretty daughter of a humble family. Their identities were not much different. In terms of martial arts, they were far apart. In terms of breasts, they were not far apart in the past, but now they were far apart. In general, they were still not as good as Mingzu. Old Man Wang seemed to agree with his conclusion and nodded. His eyes were slightly dim as he said, "The eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom is a genius." "Your Highness is indeed not as good as her." Li Yi was a little puzzled. For no reason, why did Old Man Wang compare Yang Liuqing and Mingzu? He wasn't as free as him. He still had to boil bone soup for Shawnee to nourish her body. He stood up and said, "Prime Minister Wang, if there is nothing else, I will leave first." "The soup is still boiling in the pot." Prime Minister Wang raised his head and suddenly looked at him. Chapter 1070. Pedantic, conservative, conformist, stubborn, this was Li Yi's impression of Geezer Wang. In reality, it wasn't just him. These high-ranking officials and old men all had similar images in his eyes. Only now did he realize that he was wrong, completely wrong. He shouldn't have looked at people with colored glasses, shouldn't have been biased, and shouldn't have used a single point to cover the whole. He had committed the most common mistake in the world. How was this the stubborn old prime minister? This was simply a pioneer with an avant-garde ideology. In the era without the Wu woman, Geezer Wang's ideology was hundreds or even thousands of years ahead of the rest of the world. What kind of ideological realm was this? Li Yi took a sip of tea, looked at him, and asked, "If I support Princess Duanrong as the Empress, what will happen to King Jing?" Geezer Wang should have already thought of this problem. Without any thought or hesitation, he said, "I will announce to the public that King Jing was ambushed by a traitor sent by Emperor Wu and unfortunately died. That traitor killed his brother and father, and now he even wants to assassinate his own brother. He has lost his virtue and has lost the mandate of heaven. The people of the Wu kingdom should rise up and rebel against the tyranny." To be able to think of even this kind of method, Geezer Wang's image in Li Yi's mind was invisibly raised by another level. "This is a good idea." Li Yi nodded. It was a rebellion, after all. The most important thing at the beginning was to find a reason, such as a tyrannical ruler, losing the mandate of heaven, the fall of the Emperor's star, the coming of purple qi from the east. With this as an excuse, the rest of the operation would be carried out in a logical manner. Jiang of Silla is a genius who has assisted the Jing kingdom in its resurgence. He is experienced and knowledgeable, so he must be able to see further than this old man. Geezer Wang looked at him and said, "This old man only has one question. Is it possible to support a woman as the Empress?" Li Yi put down his teacup and said with a smile, "Prime Minister Wang, have you heard of an old saying?" Geezer Wang looked at him and asked, "What old saying?" "Anything is possible." The old man surnamed Wang thought for a moment and asked, "May I know who said this?" "An ancient person with the surname Li once said that everything is possible." Li Yi smiled and said, "This sentence is for Prime Minister Wang. Anything is possible." The old man surnamed Wang repeated these words over and over again. After a while, he stood up and bowed respectfully to Li Yi. "Thank you, Jiang of Silla." In the eyes of the world, a woman becoming an empress was undoubtedly a fantasy. Several months ago, even he could not accept it. However, too many things had happened in the past few months. First, Imperial Prince Jing had no talent or virtue, which made him thoroughly disappointed. Then, the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom took charge of the government and rapidly rose to power, which also caused his mentality to change greatly. The Wu kingdom was different from the Jing kingdom and the Qi kingdom. If he wanted to change the current situation, he had to open up a new path. This path was unprecedented since ancient times. It was the first path since the beginning of the world. He did not know if this path would work until he received confirmation from Jiang of Silla. He came to ask him only to get confirmation. This would be his unwavering direction in the future. "Prime Minister, you're too kind." Li Yi waved his hand and asked with interest, "A woman becoming an empress is something that has never happened in history. Why did Prime Minister Wang suddenly think of supporting Princess Duanrong as the empress? I'm afraid it's not just because Imperial Prince Jing has lost his virtue, right?" The old man surnamed Wang asked in return, "Since the Jing kingdom has an empress, why can't our Wu kingdom have one?" Li Yi said in surprise, "Since when did the Jing kingdom have an empress? Although she doesn't have the title of empress, she is the real empress." The old man surnamed Wang said with certainty, "The Jing kingdom's emperor is muddle-headed and lazy. He is thousands of miles away from the capital city. All the affairs in the court, big or small, are handled by the eldest princess, Li Emingzu. If she isn't the empress, then what is she?" Cough. Li Yi covered his mouth and coughed softly. The old man surnamed Wang waved his sleeve. "The Jing kingdom needs a vice emperor, but the Wu kingdom doesn't need one. We only need to support the eldest princess as the empress. As for the other matters, we'll discuss them after we've cleared out the rebels." Li Yi took a sip of tea to moisten his throat. This time, he did not have to cough anymore. Li Xian walked over from behind and put his arm around the old man surnamed Wang's shoulder. He smiled and said, Come and tell me. Tell me why the Jing kingdom's emperor is muddle-headed. Who did it?" Li Xian had returned half a day earlier. When he found out that Shaoning was injured, he was extremely angry. He looked at Li Yi and said angrily, "I've only been gone for a few days, and you've already injured Shaoning. How did you protect her? How can I be at ease when I hand her over to you in the future? Li Yi could not refute this matter. Shanning used her other uninjured leg to hop over and said, "Brother, it's not Mister's fault. It's all my fault. Where's the assassin? Who sent him?" Li Xian's anger had not dissipated. How dare he assassinate the Jing Kingdom's princess? I'm going to hack him into pieces. The Wu Kingdom's emperor. Li Yi looked at him and said, "The assassin was sent by the Wu Kingdom's emperor. Why don't you send your troops to wipe out the Wu Kingdom? I'll lend you the red barbarian cannon and give you a 20% discount on the new weapons." Li Xian quickly calmed down. The war between the Jing Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom and the Zhao Kingdom had just subsided for less than 2 years. They were still at the stage of stabilizing the national economy. It was impossible for them to wipe out the Wu Kingdom for no reason. Even if Li Xian agreed, the courtiers would not agree. Li Xian had nowhere to vent his anger. He gritted his teeth and said, "I'll go and see how the old man's writing is going. Meditate and reflect on one's own mistakes. Don't talk about other people's wrongs while chatting." This ancient saying was very good. Don't speak ill of others behind their backs. Because old man Wang spoke ill of Li Xian behind his back, he was taken down by 2 imperial consecrators on the spot. The 2 consecrators were older than him, and there was no such thing as respecting the old and loving the young. Li Xian did not make things difficult for him. He just locked him in his room and made him write a 5,000-word reflection. The content of the reflection was to praise him, saying that he was wise and mighty, indomitable, talented and good-looking, and a famous ruler throughout the ages. Li Yi felt that old man Wang, as the prime minister, should not lack a 5,000-word vocabulary. If Li Xian did not vent his anger on him, it should not be a problem for him to double the number of words. As it turned out, Li Xian did not do things in such a low-end way. He only made old man Wang read what he had written with great emotion. According to an imperial guard who did not want to be named, the old man fell down before he finished half of the content. When he fell down, he vomited and had diarrhea. It was extremely miserable. Li Yi had not seen old man Wang for 3 days, and it had also been 3 days since he saw Yang Fu. In these 3 days, Yang Liuqing did chores such as cleaning the courtyard and drying the clothes as usual. She was more like a servant girl of the Li family than a princess. She never talked much. She just buried herself in her work and had little communication with Rui. Until the morning of the 3rd day, the weather was sunny and the breeze was gentle. Li Yi came out to bask in the sun with Shanning in his arms and played chess with her casually. Rui stood behind him and watched the game. Many times, she expressed her disdain for his loss to Shanning. Rui, Ruoqing and 3rd Miss Chen took turns to take Li Mu from Zui Mo's hands and walked around the yard with her in their arms. A little further away, Yang Liuqing was helping Li Duan correct his movements. Under her guidance, Li Duan had been able to play a complete set of boxing. Of course, his fist technique only had the form, it did not have any power. Compared with Shanning, Li Yi's chess skills seemed very bad, or even no chess skills at all. So it made Mississippi Lu have the illusion that she could also beat him. Chapter 1071. Mississippi Lu's disciple did not belong here. Li Yi had long known that this day would come. Her injuries had healed a long time ago, and her martial arts had also improved. These days, she had never mentioned a certain matter, but it did not mean that she had let it go or forgotten it. In her eyes, there was the great hatred of her parents and brothers, as well as the people of the Wu Kingdom. She could let it go for a while, but she could not let it go forever. Mississippi Lu held a chess piece in her hand, and after a moment of silence, she asked, "When are you leaving?" Yang Liuqing lowered his head and said, "Tomorrow." Mississippi Lu put down the chess piece and said, "Got it. Master, martial uncle, I will leave first." She lowered her head and fell silent. After a long time, she said in a low voice and turned to leave. When she reached the gate of the courtyard, her footsteps paused. With this step, she would be in 2 completely different worlds, 2 completely different lives. Unfortunately, she had no other choice. She looked back again, turned her head, and strode out. This game of chess was not finished, because the players were not in the mood. Li Yi was a bit conflicted. He had never expressed any intention of helping Yang Liuqing. First, it was because what she wanted to do was too important and risky, and it required a great investment of money. If he helped her with all his strength, even he could not afford it. Second, it was because fundamentally speaking, he was not helping Yang Liuqing, but Yang Fu. Yang Liuqing was his martial nephew, his own martial nephew. Who was Yang Fu? But now it was different. From a sociological point of view, Yang Fu was already a dead man. He could not appear in front of the people of the Wu Kingdom again. For the rest of his life, he could only choose to be an ordinary person. And if he was not in a hurry, he did not need to use the red barbarian cannon to blast his way through. He could take the dog head of the emperor of the Wu Kingdom within 3 months and take the simple and violent route. In fact, the rebellion could be done slowly. He only needed to provide some strategic support and weapons support to help her mobilize the strength of the people of the Wu Kingdom, unite the front, and advance step by step. To be honest, it had always been a regret in his heart that Mingzhu did not sit on the throne. However, since things had come to this, he could not possibly rebel against Li Xian. Now, there was a great opportunity in front of him. If he missed it, it would be a pity. After all, if he missed this opportunity, he wouldn't get another one. Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu, thought for a moment, and said, this is her choice. Mississippi Lu stood up and walked back to her room. Li Yi sighed. He knew that Rui was conflicted. On one hand, she wanted to help her only disciple, but on the other hand, she had to think about everyone else. She would no longer act on impulse or passion. Li Duan and Li Mu, in the future, there might be Li Xiao and Li Rong, and their other children were also the second generation. In this generation, Yang Liuqing was the eldest. Li Yi patted Li Duan's head gently and said, "Senior sister is going back to her hometown." Li Duan was a little disappointed when he heard this. Senior sister was gone, and there was one less person to play with him. But even he wanted to go back to the capital and see Xiao Rui. Senior sister had been away from home for so long, and she must be very homesick. Old man Wang got into the carriage early. He was too ashamed to see anyone now, especially Li Xian. At his age, he was caught on the spot criticizing others behind their backs, and then he suffered inhuman torture. This would be a stain that this old man could not wash away for the rest of his life. Wei Liang and Chen Qing stood behind Yang Liuqing, looking resolute. There was a kind of rustling wind and cold water, and a strong man who would never return. Yang Liuqing walked to Mississippi Lu, knelt down on both knees, and respectfully bowed 3 times. He stood up and said, "Master, I'm leaving. Take care of yourself in the future." Li Yi was half a step behind Mississippi Lu. He could clearly see her clenching and unclenching her fists. Yang Liuqing turned and left. After a few steps, he suddenly stopped and walked to Li Yi's side. He said, "Uncle, I have a few words to say to you in private." Li Yi was startled. He confirmed that she was talking to him and not Mississippi Lu. After glancing at Rui, he turned and walked into the room. Yang Liuqing slowly followed. She looked up at Li Yi, and a smile appeared on her face. She said, "After thinking about it carefully, there are some words that I still want to tell Uncle before I leave. I'm afraid that if I leave this time, I won't have the chance to say it again." Li Yi's lips parted slightly, and a look of surprise appeared on his face. What's going on? He suddenly thought of a ridiculous possibility in his heart, but he quickly erased this thought. This was too ridiculous. At this moment, Yang Liuqing had already begun to speak with a smile. "Actually, Uncle has always been the person I admire the most in my heart." Li Yi secretly cursed in his heart. As expected, he had guessed correctly. Mississippi Lu was standing outside. If she wanted to listen, she could totally hear what he said. However, she was about to leave. Before leaving, Li Yi did not want to hurt her heart anymore. How should he reject her tactfully so that he would not hurt her? Should he tell a white lie? But Rui's limpid eyes would not cut him with a sword out of kindness. "Uncle is very smart. In my heart, you are the smartest person in the world. You have penetrating insight, and you take every possibility into account. There is nothing that can baffle you. Li Yi blushed a little as he waved his hand and said, not at all. Actually, I am still a little far from what you have said. Yang Liuqing smiled and said, Uncle doesn't have to be humble. I have seen all the things that you have done all these years. He did not expect that she had secretly been paying attention to him for so long. Li Yi sighed and said, I understand your intentions, but, Uncle is very smart, but in some matters, you are very stupid. Yang Liuqing looked at him and said, actually, Master and Uncle are very similar. Both of them will not easily speak out their thoughts. However, Uncle is a man. There are some things that cannot wait for a woman to speak first. This turn was a little abrupt. Li Yi did not react in time. These words cannot be said to Master. I can only say it to Uncle. Yang Liuqing looked at him and said, from now on, I don't know when we can meet again. I don't know if we can meet again, Uncle, take care. She said this last sentence, turned around and walked out of the room. Li Yi looked at her back and sighed. He said slowly, you. Stop right there. He rubbed the space between his eyebrows. Because of a certain problem, he felt a slight headache. How to launch a successful rebellion in the ancient times. Waiting online. It's urgent. Chapter 1072. Yang Liuqing's footsteps paused, but she did not turn her head. You are going to die like this, Li Yi shook his head and said, isn't it just a rebellion? It's not a big deal. Uncle Master will help you. Yang Liuqing's body trembled slightly. All these years, she had only shed tears twice when her father and brother had been killed, and when her mother had committed suicide, and when she had reunited with her master. She had brought Yang Fu with her when they had been chased by the imperial court. She had not cried when they had been on the run. She had not cried when they had fought their way out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood when they had been defeated by the imperial court. But at this moment, because of Li Yi's words, she had instantly burst into tears. She wiped her tears, and when she turned her head, her face was already smiling. She shook her head and said, Uncle Master, I appreciate your kindness, but these are my niece's family matters. Please do not interfere. Li Yi looked at her and asked, do you know what the first rule of our sect is? Yang Liuqing shook her head and said in a low voice, we do not have a sect, and we do not have rules. Now we do. Li Yi looked at her and said, the first rule of our sect is to be obedient. Uncle Master, Li Yi gently patted her head, as if he was patting Li Duan, and said, be good, be obedient, Uncle Master. If you do not listen, you will be punished according to the sect rules. She looked at Li Yi's solemn expression, opened her mouth, and did not say another word. However, the tears in her eyes that she had been holding back rolled down uncontrollably, sliding down her face. At first, it was only one or two, but then it became a string. She squatted on the ground and hugged her knees. Although she was still trying hard to hold back, she could not help but cry out. Li Yi was most afraid of girls crying. When Zumo cried, he could hug her and comfort her gently, but the person in front of him was his martial nephew. When Yang Liuqing cried, he didn't even know where to put his hands. Especially when Mississippi Lu heard the noise and walked into the room. She stood at the door and saw Yang Liuqing squatting on the floor, hugging his knees and crying. When she looked at him again, he didn't know what to do. Yang Liuqing cried for a while before she stopped. She stood up straight, her face slightly red. Li Yi thought of what she had just said and asked curiously, what did you say just now? What happened between your master and me? Mississippi Lu glared at him, then at Yang Liuqing, and pulled her away. Li Yi was a little confused. He wasn't the one who had made her precious disciple cry. He couldn't help her, but he couldn't help her either. He was in a bad spot. It was normal for girls to be sentimental. There was nothing shameful about crying, not to mention in front of him and Rui. Old man Wang would be greatly embarrassed. Because he didn't want to see anyone, he had long hidden in the carriage, waiting to leave. But now that he was not in a hurry to leave, he had to get off the carriage and walk back under everyone's gaze. Even the servant girls of the Li family knew that the old man beside Miss Yang liked to talk behind people's backs. He was so old that he still pooped his pants. Old man Wang had replaced Yang Fu and become the man of the hour. As early as a few days ago, Yang Fu had been sent to the mountains. He would spend a very long time on one of the mountains in the land of chaos. Shen Qing had personally led people to the Wu kingdom to spread the news that the former emperor's legitimate son, King Jing, had been assassinated by Emperor Wu's men and died early. This just happened to confirm an old saying. Some people were alive, but they were already dead. Rebellion had never been a simple thing. Rebellion also had to pay attention to basic laws and core values. Li Yi played it down when he said it, but when he really carried it out, he had to be very careful with every step he took. Fortunately, he had a lot of useful information to search for and countless historical experiences to learn from. He didn't even have to tailor it for them. There were thousands of ways to rebel, and there would always be one that suited them. Moreover, she wasn't rebelling. She was also the legitimate heir of the Wu kingdom. What she wanted to do was to set things right. In fact, compared to Mingzhu, it was even easier for her to ascend to the supreme position. Mingzhu's real identity was a princess, and she was the real princess royal of the Wu kingdom. She had a very high prestige among the people of the Wu kingdom. According to Old Man Wang, they also had some old subordinates of the former dynasty who were deeply hidden in the imperial court. Before the official rebellion, Li Yi naturally had to understand these things first. This time, he didn't intend to use too much power. Wang Wei and the others would be enough to manage the fringe well. Other than a few experts, the Lu League didn't need to move into the Wu kingdom on a large scale. Their power was never the deciding factor, and they were also not Yang Liuqing's biggest reliance. Historical experience told him that the more ferocious the enemy was and the more difficult the environment was, the more it was necessary to mobilize the power of the people. Uncle Master. A figure came from behind and sat beside him. Yang Liuqing was silent for a moment. Then, he said softly, "Uncle Master, I don't want to take revenge anymore." Li Yi turned to look at her. She thought for a moment and said, "Once we start the rebellion, many people will die, many innocent people." Li Yi knew that deep in her heart, she still didn't want to be a burden to him and Rui. But in reality, he didn't want to be a burden either. In the face of an army of tens of thousands, their strength was far from enough. Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Even if you don't start the rebellion, will there be fewer people dying?" Yang Liuqing lowered her head and didn't say anything. The Wu kingdom was now divided by warlords. There were conflicts between the imperial court and the major forces, and between the major forces themselves. The ones who suffered in the middle were the millions of innocent people. As long as this chaos didn't end, the people would suffer one more day, and the number of people who died would increase. She shook her head and said, "I can't be a burden to Master and Uncle Master." Li Yi looked at her and said, "You're Master and I can't help you clear away all the obstacles. You still have to rely on yourself." A smile involuntarily appeared on her face. Even if she only had 500 soldiers under her command, as long as she knew that her Master and Uncle Master were behind her, she still had the confidence of a magnificent army. Yang Liuqing nodded and showed a hint of determination on her face. She said, "Thank you, Uncle Master. I definitely won't let Master and Uncle Master down." Li Yi looked at her and said, "It's up to you to rescue the people of the Wu kingdom from the abyss of suffering." Yang Liuqing thought for a moment and suddenly asked, "Uncle Master, can I ask you a question?" "Go ahead." Li Yi leaned back on the chair and put his hands behind his head as he said casually. "Uncle Master seems to really want us to rise up and rebel, really? Ever since the day Prime Minister Wang came to find Uncle Master, I felt it. Before that, I knew Uncle Master didn't want me to take revenge. It must be a misconception." Li Yi saw that she was looking at him. He looked around and saw Shaoning, who had one leg wrapped and was sitting on the swing with Yongning. He thought for a moment and said, "If Emperor Wu hadn't killed his father and usurped the throne, you wouldn't have escaped to Shuzhou. If you hadn't escaped to Shuzhou, he wouldn't have sent people to kill you. If he hadn't sent people to kill you, Shaoning wouldn't have attacked that assassin. If Shaoning didn't attack that assassin, she wouldn't have sprained her ankle." Yang Liuqing looked at him with a trace of doubt on her face. So, if Emperor Wu hadn't killed his father and usurped the throne, Shaoning wouldn't have sprained her ankle. Li Yi looked at Shaoning, who was not far away, and explained, "She's my disciple. If I don't avenge her ankle, I won't be able to take it lying down." He then looked at Yang Liuqing and said, "So, you have to work hard to end the situation of the Wu Kingdom's clique. Take back the country that the traitor stole from you. If Yang Fu can't help him, you can become the emperor yourself. Govern the Wu Kingdom well and return peace to the people." Yang Liuqing still didn't understand why they wanted to rebel when Shaoning sprained her ankle. Chapter 1073. From the bottom of his heart, Li Yi actually did not want to persuade someone to be an emperor. This was the minister appointed by the late emperor of Wu Kingdom to entrust the orphan to him. He was the former prime minister, Old Wang. Through the deeds of the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom in charge of politics, and coincidentally, he met the emperor of the Jing Kingdom in Shuzhou, who looked the least like an emperor. After suffering a double blow both mentally and physically, he brainstormed for a while before coming up with this unprecedented idea that would shock the heavens and the earth and make the gods cry. Li Yi could swear to God that he had no part in this process. What was more coincidental was that it was Yang Liuqing who wanted to overthrow the tyranny of the Wu Kingdom, establish a new regime, and liberate the poor people of the Wu Kingdom. Who was Yang Liuqing? He was Mississippi Lu's disciple, the only disciple, and his blood relative. Who was Mississippi Lu? She was Lu Rui, his sister-in-law, the only sister-in-law, and his blood relative. He and Rui were of the same generation, so Yang Liuqing was his martial nephew, the only martial nephew, and his blood relative. Could he just watch as his own disciple sent himself to his death, and cause Rui to sink into pain and sorrow every time she thought of her disciple? Obviously not. Moreover, Shaoning had sprained her ankle, and he had to take revenge. Li Yi decided to go back to his room and take out the proposal that he had been saving up for a while to refer to it. It was originally tailor-made for Emingzu, but due to various reasons, it could only be put aside permanently. Li Yi had thought that he would never need it again in this life, but he did not expect that it could be put to use so soon. Although Emingzu and Yang Liuqing had the same ultimate goal, they had different starting points, different circumstances, and completely different paths to take. One was a gentle replacement, while the other was a violent revolution. However, there were some similarities between them. It was a pity that Emingzu did not come this time. Otherwise, she could have exchanged insights with Yang Liuqing. After all, she was his senior. Speaking of Emingzu, he really missed her. He didn't know if she had gained weight or lost weight. He also didn't know if she drank soup often. He also didn't know if she missed him and his egg-fried rice. Li Yi sighed. In fact, he should go back to the capital to have a look. But Li Mu was only a few months old and couldn't stand the long journey. What's more, he had something important to do soon. After being idle for so long, his hands were really itching. The blood in his chest that had been cold for a long time seemed to have a tendency to heat up again. Which area should he start from? While Li Yi was deep in thought, a figure walked past him. He raised his head, thought for a moment, then waved his hand and said, "Su Zheng, come here for a moment." Li Xian was very regretful. He really wanted to see how Yang Liuqing would rebel. If possible, he even wanted to participate personally and fire the first shot of the revolutionary uprising. But they had stayed in Shuzhou for a few months. It had been more than half a year since he left the capital. There had never been an emperor like him. Many courtiers had already expressed strong dissatisfaction with this. There had also been a certain degree of instability in the capital. Moreover, he couldn't abandon his wife and children to wander outside. They were going back. Li Yi carried Shaoning on his back and walked on the street. Her feet hadn't fully recovered, and it was inconvenient for her to walk with a cane. So during this period of time, Li Yi was her legs. Shuzhou should have become the largest commodity trading center in the Jing Kingdom and even in the surrounding countries. In a small Yong county, they could buy the specialties of each country. They were going to leave tomorrow. Li Yi specially took her out to buy things today. Just the number of guards following behind to take the items was already more than 10. Bai Su followed by his side. She was Shawning's personal bodyguard. These days, she was inseparable from her, so naturally, she was inseparable from Li Yi. Luckily, the enmity and grudges between them had already vanished into thin air along with that piece of secret prescription. This young Miss Bai's attitude towards him was much better, and occasionally she would even smile at him, which made Li Yi feel overwhelmed by the favor. He even felt that Bai Su's previous sexual orientation was different from other women because she felt too inferior in some areas, so she had a rebellious mentality. Because her foundation was too weak, she could have obvious results in a short period of time. This directly caused her confidence to soar. Perhaps she could reverse this mentality. From the bottom of his heart, he still hoped that Bai Su could be a normal woman. It was good to be a woman. Shanning was a little quiet today. She lay on his back without saying a word. She was completely different from the past when she always had endless things to say. She didn't say a word, as if she had something on her mind. Whenever she was unhappy, Li Yi would always try his best to make her happy. However, today was different. She could stay here for another month or two in a self-harming way, but no more. A woman walked past them with a child. The child, who was about 4 or 5 years old, looked at the rows of sugar figurines on the street. He tugged at the woman's sleeve and asked, "Mother, what are these?" The woman looked back and said with a smile, "These are sugar figurines." The child looked at the sugar figurines in the shape of animals. His throat moved, and he asked, "Can these sugar figurines be eaten?" The woman smiled and walked forward to ask the old man blowing the sugar figurines, "Old man, can these sugar figurines be eaten?" Seeing his mother walk to the stall, the child's face lit up with joy. His eyes seemed to be shining. When the old man saw that there was a customer, he immediately nodded and said, "Yes. Madam, how many do you want?" "It's only 2 copper coins each." The woman turned back and stroked the child's head. She said, "Did you hear that? Grandpa said it can be." With that said, she held the child's hand and disappeared into the vast crowd. Shanning, who was lying on Li Yi's back, finally laughed. "Huh, sir, did you see that?" That child was almost crying when he left. She wrapped her arms around Li Yi's neck and said, "Sir, I want to eat sugar figurines." She still remembered that the day before her husband left 2 years ago, he had bought her a lot of sugar figurines. She had not eaten them since then. Later, the old man who sold sugar figurines in the capital passed away. This was the first time she had seen sugar figurines since then. When Li Yi walked over, the old man got up from his chair and asked, "Sir, do you want sugar figurines? Do you want to blow them or draw them?" "The blowing ones are 5 copper coins, and the drawing ones are 2 copper coins." Li Yi thought for a moment and asked, "Can I blow one myself?" The sugar figurines that Shanning and the rest had eaten in the past were all drawn. This kind of sugar figurine was usually used to eat. It was more difficult to blow a sugar figurine, but the shape was 3-dimensional and more aesthetically pleasing. The old man smiled and said, "Sir, don't underestimate these little sugar figurines. Even the simplest shape is not something that ordinary people can blow. Without years or decades of practice, you can't blow it well." Li Yi smiled and did not say anything. Although his library did not have much of a presence, it had never dropped the ball at critical moments. To think that he knew about astronomy, geography, elliptic hyperbola, hybrid biosphere, satellites in the sky, and submarines in the sea. How could a mere sugar figurine stump him? Although there was no book that taught him how to blow a sugar figurine, it was ultimately an art. Just like calligraphy and painting, they were different routes to the same goal. With the addition of body and breath control, how could a dignified expert on the heaven list not be able to do these? Under the old man's doubtful gaze, he washed his hands, took out a small piece of sugar paste and skillfully pulled out a candy stick. At this moment, the old man's eyes were already filled with surprise. Shanning's eyes also lit up. As he blew, he pinched the sugar figurine with his hands. Soon, a simple figure appeared in his hands. The surprise in the old man's eyes had already turned into shock. The difficulty of blowing a person and blowing an animal were worlds apart. Chapter 1074. After blowing a candy figure for Shanning, Li Yi noticed that Bai Su was looking at him strangely. It was as if she was looking at a beast. He thought to himself, even if her breasts become bigger in the future, she will still be as narrow-minded as before. It's just that I gave it to Shawning and not her, so he blew another candy figure for her. It was a big-breasted woman with the same beautiful meaning and blessing. When the old man who sold the candy figure found out that Li Yi was not in the same trade as the one who blew the candy figure, he was obviously in high spirits. He insisted that he did not take his money. It was only a few copper coins, so Li Yi did not insist. Shawning held the candy figure in her hand. She could not bear to eat it until they returned home. Bai Su could not bear to eat it either. She looked at the candy figure in her hand enviously. Li Yi placed Shawning on the bed in the room and asked, "What do you want to eat today? I will make it for you." She counted with her fingers and said, "I want to eat spicy prawns, steamed fish, braised pork ribs, and Sir's soup." Tomorrow, she and Li Xian would set off for the capital. Before that, Li Yi would fulfill all her requests. When Li Yi walked out of the room, Shawning sat on the bed for a while before jumping off. She put on her shoes and looked around the room. After a while, she found a brocade box and carefully placed the candy figure in it. Bai Su stood outside the door and looked at the candy figure in her hand for a long time. A trace of jealousy appeared on her face. She bit off the candy figure's breast. "I will be back," said Li Xian solemnly as he stood at the entrance of the prince's mansion. The fringe was a good place, especially the secret base that Li Yi had built there. In the past, the place he wanted to stay the most was the Academy of Sciences. But now, the Academy of Sciences was second to him. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Where is Shawning?" Bai Su replied, "In the room." Li Xian sighed and said, "If only she could stay for a few more months." Li Yi looked at his legs, and Li Xian felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine, and he shivered. Li Yi looked at him and shook his head. "You guys go first. Wait at the city gate. I will bring her there in a while." In the room, Shawning's foot was still wrapped in white gauze. When she saw Li Yi, she said in a low voice, "Sir." Li Yi walked to the bed and squatted with his back to her. He said, "They have gone first. I will carry you to the city gate. Wait a minute, I still have something to bring." Knowing that Mr. would carry her to the city gate, Xu Ning seemed a little happy. She hurriedly jumped off the bed, ran to the cabinet barefooted, and took out a small box. "Wait a moment, I still have something to bring." Knowing that her teacher would carry her to the city gate, Shawning was clearly happy. She quickly jumped off the bed and ran barefoot to the side of the cupboard. She took out a small box. Li Yi pretended not to see it, and she pretended not to see it. Li Yi pretended not to see it. Holding the box, she ran over, put on her shoes, and lay on his back. The sloppy old man glanced at her. "Little girl, you don't have eyes." Bai Su lowered her head and didn't say anything. She and Jiang of Silla could still bicker and glare at each other, but she didn't dare to get angry at the old man in front of her. Because Jiang of Silla couldn't beat her, and even 10 of her couldn't beat this old man. Shawning's personality was lively. In the past, she would always be like a little bird chirping around him. Now that she had grown up, she always spoke softly, but she still had endless things to say. She couldn't wait to tell her all the interesting things that happened in the capital after Li Yi left the capital. For example, Li Han, who all the civil and military officials wanted to have a good relationship with, was always despised by a little girl, Duan Wu. He even used his position as the dean and threatened not to graduate to force a student from the Mathematics Institute to pass on information for him. It was all because the student's sister was Duan Wu's good friend. There was also a certain important official in the court who couldn't stand his fierce wife at home. He went to the women's union to report that his fierce wife often used violence against him. She and Li Yi had been talking about such interesting things for a few months, but there was no end to it. No matter how long the road was, there would always be an end. Li Yi didn't know how many streets and alleys he had gone through, but at some point, he arrived at the city gate. "Teacher." Shawning suddenly said. "Yes." Li Yi habitually tilted his head slightly so that he could hear more clearly. The young girl's soft lips pressed against the side of his face. Shaoning jumped down from his back and waved at him. Her pretty face was full of smiles. Goodbye, teacher. She ran into the city gate and looked back every 3 steps. Li Yi personally sent the caravan of nearly 100 people out of the city. The girl who had been waving at him for a long time on the carriage at the very front had already disappeared. He stood in place and watched for a long time until he could not even see the last shadow of the figure. Yongning stood beside him and held his hand. She asked, "Brother, when will royal sister come to see us again?" Li Yi thought for a while and said, "Maybe next year." Yongning smiled and said, "Next year, I'll be 10 years old next year. Royal sister said that when I turn 10, she'll give me a big present." Li Yi held her hand and walked into the city gate. When they walked into the city, Li Yi looked at the hot sun above his head and said, "Sunny, go back and pack your things. Tomorrow, we'll be moving to the mountains." "Okay, okay." The young girl seemed very happy. Her voice was clear. Fong said that next time, he'll bring me and Dwayner to the mountains to hunt rabbits. Wu Kingdom, imperial capital, inside the palace walls. The hot sun roasted the ground, and waves of heat hit. A eunuch ran through the palace gate. When he ran to a certain hall, he was already drenched in sweat. He didn't have time to wipe the sweat off his face or tidy up his clothes. He walked to the door of the hall and pushed it open. He stood respectfully in the hall and said, "Your Majesty, urgent report from Tsangzhou." In the hall, other than the young man sitting at the top, there were a few other people. A man in green cupped his fists and said, "Your Majesty, in the past 3 months, 3 more provinces in the northwest have rebelled. However, they aren't very strong. General Cheng has already led the army to suppress them. We should be able to receive good news soon." The young man nodded and looked at the eunuch. He asked, "What's the matter?" The eunuch knelt on the ground and said, "Your Majesty, urgent report from Tsangzhou, said that His Highness King Jing was assassinated a month ago." "He has died." The young man clenched and relaxed his fists. He asked with a sullen face, "What did you say? King Jing was assassinated?" "It's news from Tsangzhou. Everyone in Tsangzhou knows about King Jing's death. Investigate." The young man's face was as dark as water. He said coldly, "Investigate this thoroughly. Arrest the villain who assassinated King Jing. I want to execute his 9 generations. 10 generations. Peng Yong, I'll leave this matter to you. Don't come back to see me if you don't catch him." "Yes." The general in green immediately cupped his fists and slowly retreated. When only the young man was left in the hall, he slowly sat down and a smile appeared on his face. He turned around, and a withered hand clutched his neck. Grand uncle. He was lifted up by the neck. His face was red, and he said with difficulty, "You." Opposite him, an old man looked at him with bloodshot eyes. He gritted his teeth and said, "B****. Do you still have any humanity?" His hand tightened slightly, and the young man's face became even redder. After an unknown amount of time, he released his hand and suddenly flung it. The young man fell to the ground, clutching his neck and gasping for breath. The old man looked at him and did not hide the murderous intent in his eyes. He said gloomily, "If you hadn't massacred all the members of the Yang imperial family, and only the 2 of us are left, I would have sent you to see your father today." The young man clutched his neck and suddenly laughed. He said, "So what if I massacred them? Isn't there still grand uncle? If you kill me, you can become the emperor yourself. You're just afraid that you're too old to have a son and leave the Yang imperial family without a successor." The old man kicked him, and the young man's body moved several feet horizontally in the hall. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, but his face was full of a crazy smile. "Lunatic, you lunatic." The old man looked at him and said angrily, "Do you really think I don't dare to kill you? Of course you don't dare." The young man supported himself against a pillar and slowly stood up. He asked mockingly, "Other than you and me, there are no males in the Yang imperial family. If you kill me, who will become the emperor, my poor sister?" Chapter 1075. Greetings, Elder Ancestor. Two eunuchs stood at the entrance of the hall. When they saw a figure in gray walking out, they immediately knelt on the ground. The old man did not even look at the two eunuchs and quickly left. The two eunuchs looked at each other and saw fear in each other's eyes. How could they not have heard the commotion in the hall just now? However, among the two people in the hall, one was the current emperor, and the other was the most revered elder ancestor of the royal family. A battle of this level was far from what they could participate in. When the elder ancestor was young, he was the most famous prince in the Wu kingdom. He had once personally led an army and won a war that almost overturned the Wu kingdom. After that, he quickly quelled a few rebellions in the country and captured countless people's hearts. However, just when he had won the hearts of the people and the court officials, and was only one step away from ascending to the throne, he inexplicably went to pursue some illusory martial path and left the imperial capital. There was no news of him for 20 years. At that time, the emperor was already beyond cure. Before he passed away, he searched everywhere for the elder ancestor, but to no avail. In desperation, he could only pass the throne to his younger brother. More than 10 years later, a prince who held great power forced the emperor to abdicate and rebel. His army had already fought their way to the outskirts of the imperial capital. He was only one step away from making the emperor pass the throne. However, on the last day of the 3-day limit that the prince set for the court officials and the royal family, his own head was hung on the palace wall. In one night, more than 10 generals who had participated in the rebellion were all killed, and their heads were separated from their bodies. The elder ancestor had quelled the rebellion single-handedly. From then on, he had become a legend in the hearts of the people of the Wu kingdom and the court officials. He was also the greatest glory of the royal family. It was said that he had already climbed to the peak of martial path. His martial arts cultivation was superb, and it was difficult to find a match in the world. In the royal family, he had the highest seniority, the most respected position, and the greatest influence. Even the emperors of the past dynasties had to be respectful to him. It was a pity that there were not many people left in the royal family of the Wu kingdom now. After His Majesty ascended to the throne, blood flowed like a river in the capital. Those who were uprooted were not only the ministers who accused him of plotting to usurp the throne, but also all the men of the royal family. They were all killed by him for various reasons. Every time they thought of this matter, they would feel a chill down their spines. The door to the hall was slowly pushed open. The young man wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and brushed off the footprints on his chest. He held his chest and walked out with great difficulty. The expressions of the two eunuchs changed, and they immediately went forward. Your Majesty, what's wrong? Imperial physician, quickly summon the imperial physician. The young man waved his hand and said, Let the head of the internal guards come and see me. Yes. The eunuch responded and left quickly. The internal guards belonged to the emperor alone. Other than being responsible for the safety of the imperial city, they also controlled the matters of the imperial capital and even the entire Wu kingdom. They were a sharp sword hanging over the heads of all high officials and nobles. The young man walked back into the hall and slowly walked to the top and sat down. He clenched his fists tightly, and his face was as gloomy as water. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and muttered, Grandmaster, Grandmaster. Imperial uncle, I am the emperor of the Wu kingdom. You are old, very old, so old that you can die. Not long after, an old eunuch pushed open the door and walked to the young man's side. He bowed and said, Your Majesty, what are your orders? The young man looked at him, narrowed his eyes, and asked, Is Yang Fu really dead? The eunuch said in a hoarse voice, Your Majesty, although no one has come to claim the reward, the news of King Jing's death has already spread to several prefectures, including Cangzhou. In a few days, the entire Wu kingdom will know about it. At that time, even if he is not dead, there is no difference from being dead. He cupped his hands respectfully. Congratulations, Your Majesty. With King Jing's death, no one will be able to pose any threat to Your Majesty. The young man pondered for a moment and said slowly, If he is alive, I want to see him. If he is dead, I want to see his corpse. Think of a way to contact those spies. Yes, Your Majesty, the eunuch answered. The young man looked at the eunuch and asked, you are only one step away from becoming a grandmaster, so you must know a lot about martial arts. Grandmasters can never be defeated, right? The eunuch shook his head and said, grandmasters are not immortals. No matter how good their martial arts are, they are only one person. They can't fight against thousands of troops and horses. If thousands of troops and horses can be used, do I need to ask you? The eunuch shivered and immediately said, apart from that, only a grandmaster can defeat a grandmaster. Hidden weapons and poisons are just insignificant tricks to them. The young man clenched his fists and said in a deep voice, help me recruit a grandmaster at all costs. The eunuch was stunned and said, Your Majesty, most grandmasters are indifferent. They come and go without a trace. The young man looked at him and asked, you mean, you can't do this? The old eunuch trembled. He cupped his fists and said, please rest assured, Your Majesty. The young man returned to his seat and looked at the empty hall. He murmured, the Wu kingdom only needs an emperor. It doesn't need an ancestor. The fringe had long been built into a stable base by Li Yi. After clearing out the bandits, the first thing he needed to do was to roll up his sleeves and work hard to focus on the construction. Up until now, the several mountains around the stockade village had all been renovated. There was a slide down the mountain, and the road up the mountain was also made of cement. After the dozens of mountains in the vicinity were surrounded, a city was formed. It was called the City of Rui. At first, Li Yi wanted to name the city after himself. Unfortunately, his name was not as nice as Rui's. The title of Wulin Chancellor and King of Bandits was Rui, not him. He had no choice but to give up. The headquarters of the Lu League had long been moved to the city of Rui. They occupied a mountain alone. After mixing up the bandits they had subdued, there were more than 20,000 of them. These people were in charge of the defense of the entire fringe. They were in charge of the defense of the entire land of chaos. With the cooperation of a few thousand people, in the land of chaos, which was easy to defend but hard to attack, with the advantage of the terrain and sharp weapons, even the army of the Wu kingdom would not be able to break in. Of course, these were the forces of the city of Rui. Li Yi did not intend to use these people to help Yang Liuqing attack the city. They would not be of much use outside. Every summer, when the weather was the hottest, it was a good choice to come to Rui to escape the heat. Rui had nothing to do, so she taught a few disciples. Drunk Ink had been idle for a long time, so she could not help but start designing clothes. Of course, this included brassiere. This time, Li Yi had a reason to openly admire and help her come up with strategies. Ruoqing was actually the busiest. Although she had put aside the matters of the brothel, she had an even more important mission. In the near future, there were countless people in the Wu kingdom who were in dire straits waiting to bathe in the radiance of the Empress. In the far future, there were hundreds of thousands of lost believers in the Qi kingdom who were waiting for her to guide them. One advised people to be kind and charitable, while the other advised people to be evil and rebel. It was clear which concubine was real and which one was fake. Yang Liuqing stayed here for the time being because Li Yi's Empress plan had not been completed. He had to stay here to accompany his wife and child. He could only write down the things she wanted to do in detail on a piece of paper. Of course, he could not be bookish. He would not limit their actions to such a small book. From the Zhangzhou of the Wu kingdom to here, there was an extremely smooth road. The speed of information transmission was extremely fast. It could be reached in a day, and new strategies could be formulated at any time. Li Yi wrote a part of the plan and walked out to take a breath of fresh air. He saw Su leaning against a big tree, with a chicken drumstick in one hand and wine in the other. He took a bite of the chicken and drank a mouthful of wine. He still looked so sloppy, but there was a faint sense of elegance. He had the temperament of a qigong. This was the demeanor of a different grandmaster, especially when paired with the melancholy and hesitation that appeared in his eyes. Li Yi could almost be sure that this was an old man with a story. The imperial palace of the Wu kingdom. The emperor of the Wu kingdom looked at an old woman in the hall and slowly said, "As long as you help me with this matter, I will agree to any of your requests." The old woman had a head of white hair, but there were not many wrinkles on her face. Her body was not stooped at all. She looked at the young man in front of her, her expression as calm as an ancient well. "You are the emperor?" The young man was startled, then smiled and said, "Besides the emperor, who else dares to call himself emperor? I can agree to your request." The old woman looked at him and said, "But before that, you must help me find someone." "Who?" The old woman narrowed her eyes. The wrinkles at the corners of her eyes deepened. She slowly opened her mouth and her voice was cold, making people feel as if they had fallen into an ice cave. Su Tian. Chapter 1076. Cough, cough. When Li Yi saw that Su picked up the wine pot and gulped it down, he knew that he might have choked because he had eaten too much chicken. The one who loved to eat chicken was second granduncle. In order to satisfy his craving for good food, there were 5 cooks in the family who specially made chicken for him. There were a variety of methods, including dozens of methods and over a dozen cuisines. Occasionally, they would even create new methods. Su didn't like to eat chicken in the past. He loved White Rabbit creamy candies. However, he couldn't stand eating too much sugar when he was old, so he started to imitate second great uncle. Li Yi knew that Su was actually from the Wu Kingdom. For most masters, those mundane things could no longer pique their interest. They pursued higher martial arts. Most of them would choose to travel around in search of opportunities to break through again. Of course, Su's opportunities were not outside but here. Li Yi walked over and sat opposite him. He asked, "White Rabbit creamy candies have released a new type of milk candy with low sugar content. It won't spoil your teeth. Su, do you want to try it?" The sloppy old man didn't even raise his head. He said, "Tell me, what do you want me to do?" It was great to talk to such a straightforward person. He was straightforward and didn't beat around the bush. Li Yi thought about it and said, "Su is also from the Wu Kingdom. I don't think you want to see the people of the Wu Kingdom suffer from war and live in misery. I'm not going." The sloppy old man wiped his mouth and said even more straightforwardly. Li Yi was stunned. "I haven't said what it is. You want me to protect that little girl." The sloppy old man looked at him and said, "I'm not going to the Wu Kingdom." It wasn't good to talk to such a straightforward person at all. The sloppy old man stood up and said, "With your second young mistress and the experts on the heaven list, even a master won't be able to do anything. Moreover, the only master left in the Wu Kingdom is Yang Wanli. He's also a member of the Yang royal family. He won't do anything to that little girl." Li Yi originally thought that there was nothing to worry about in the fringe with Rui and second great uncle by his side. There were also many guards outside. Yang Liuking's trip back to the Wu Kingdom was fraught with danger. With a master by his side, he didn't have to worry too much about his safety. However, since Elder Su said so, he did not insist. After all, Elder Su was a guest, not a servant of the Li family. He thought for a while and asked curiously, could it be that the Wu Kingdom only has 2 grandmasters, Elder Su and Yang Wanli? 2. The sloppy old man waved his hand and said, 3, isn't there another one here? That's even more impossible. Anyway, don't worry, there aren't that many idle grandmasters in the Wu nation. The sloppy old man seemed to be very unwilling to talk about this topic. After saying that, his figure quickly disappeared. Li Yi looked at the old man's back and shook his head. Perhaps he was really thinking too much. At first glance, Rui, second great uncle, Su, Chang, the Taoist priest with the surname Yuan, and the Taoist nun in the Qi kingdom were all masters. It seemed like masters were everywhere. But when he thought about it carefully, he didn't seem to have heard of any other masters besides them. He stretched his body and walked back to his room to finish writing the unfinished plan. Yang Liuking knocked on the door and walked in. "Uncle, you were looking for me?" Li Yi nodded and took out a book from the drawer. He handed it to her and said, "Keep this. It will be of great use in the future." Yang Liuking took it and looked at it. She was stunned and looked at him. "Uncle, this," Li Yi pointed at the book, Rebellion, "what you need to know," and said, This book is a general program and also a basic introduction. You can read it after you go down and see if you can understand it. If there is anything you don't understand, you can ask me. As for the next step of the plan, you can modify it according to the actual situation. Sorry, I took the wrong book. He saw the cover of the book and was stunned. He immediately took back the book, Queen Training Plan, from Yang Liuqing and put it back into the drawer. He handed the book, Rebellion, What You Need to Know, to her and said, "This is the book. Read it carefully these few days. I still have something to do, so I'll leave first." When he reached the door, he paused and said, "From now on, you have to be extremely careful with every step you take. It's time to get rid of those spies among your people." Other than the 2 guards by Yang Fu's side, Li Yi believed that there were still many spies planted by the martial emperor's side. The existence of these people would always be a threat, and as for how to identify and deal with them, he believed that they had their own methods. Both Wei Liang and Chen Qing came from the military, and each of them had a group of absolutely loyal personal guards who had gone through fire and water with them. It was impossible for them to be disloyal. First, these people were eliminated. There were still a few dozen of them left in the fringe. They were all left in a mountain. They did not have to worry about food and clothing here, but it was impossible for them to send any news out. Whether there were spies among them or not, it wouldn't matter anymore after a few years. After this round of cleansing, they had less than 500 soldiers. Including the first batch of people arranged by Lu Meng, they only had a little more than 600. However, their combat strength couldn't be simply measured by the number of people they had. Not to mention that some of them were experts who could fight against 10 or even dozens of experts. Even with Divine Punishment's excellent equipment, it was enough to easily deal with the elite troops of the Wu Kingdom. Of course, they had only a few people they could use to begin with. If they wanted to turn the situation around with such a small number of people, only fools would go head-on against the army of the Wu Kingdom. Yang Liuqing and the others probably still needed some time to prepare. When the first step of the plan was formulated, they would walk out of the fringe and take the first step of the revolution. Originally, he wanted to discuss with Drunken Mo about a few trendy underwear styles, but Old Man Wang came looking for him. They could only slowly talk about the underwear at night. Li Yi admired Old Man Wang very much. He was avant-garde and bold. Although he was old, he wasn't pedantic at all. This was very rare in the current era. Moreover, in the future revolution, as the former prime minister and the role model of the literati of the Wu Kingdom, Old Man Wang would play a very big role. Rui and Yang Liuqing were both martial artists. It was very easy for them to carry a knife and kill people. However, if they were to talk about unifying their thinking, the united front, how to fight the land war well, how to establish and govern a base after a great victory, not only would they have a headache, but Li Yi himself would also have a headache. Professional things should be done by professionals. These days, after Jiang of Silla's explanation, I'm suddenly enlightened. After Old Man Wang walked in, he first bowed to Li Yi. In fact, it was more than a sudden enlightenment. After talking with Li Yi for the past few days, he finally understood that there was so much to learn about rebelling. Many aspects of it were similar to governing a country through different means. He had long heard that Jiang of Silla was the best in the world and was also a famous minister in the Jing Kingdom in the past. He always thought that the rumors were exaggerated. Today, after experiencing it personally, he understood that those rumors were actually not true. "You're welcome." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Prime Minister Wang, is there a problem today?" Old Man Wang nodded and said, "Jiang of Silla should also know that the traitor who usurped the throne was insane. After killing his brother and father, he was still worried that there would be others who would threaten his throne, so he slaughtered the Yang clan with groundless charges." Li Yi nodded. He had also heard of what Emperor Wu had done. This was not only insane, it was practically antisocial and anti-human. No one would do such a thing. In this way, other than that traitor, there are no more males in the Yang clan. After Her Royal Highness ascends the throne, that traitor will definitely not be able to escape death. A trace of worry appeared on Old Man Wang's face, and he said, "But after Her Royal Highness, who should this vast world be handed over to? Li Yi understood Old Man Wang's worry very well. For example, the Jin kingdom belonged to the Li family. It was fine for Li Xian or Li Han to sit, but Li Yi himself could not sit. Emperor Wu had killed all the males in the Yang clan. In the future, Empress Yang Liuqing would be bored, so she could not casually choose someone with the surname Yang to pass the throne to. Actually, what Old Man Wang said was wrong. Didn't the Yang clan still have Yang Fu? Forget it, Old Man Wang already thought he was dead. He respected the dead, so he would not mention it. However, on this matter, the Empress in the other world had already given an answer. Li Yi looked at Old Man Wang and said, "What's so difficult about this? When your princess has children in the future, just pass it to her son. What flows in his body is still half Yang clan's blood, no?" This was a very easy problem to solve. Let Yang Liuqing's son have the surname Yang, and then inherit the throne. Old Man Wang's thoughts were still limited, but it was already not easy for him to think of the Empress. This couldn't be circumvented, and Li Yi could understand. Although Yang Liuqing's child, in terms of bloodline, could not be compared to the orthodox Yang clan's royal family, if she became the Empress, this wouldn't be a problem. In the other world, there was still someone who wanted to pass the throne to his nephew. Old Man Wang came to a sudden realization and clasped his hands, saying, "Thank you, Jiang of Silla, for dispelling my doubts. I thank you on behalf of the people of the Wu Kingdom." "You're welcome." Li Yi waved his hands again. The child born by Yang Liuqing would inherit the Wu Kingdom, so what was there to thank him for? He couldn't help her give birth to a son. Chapter 1077. Although Li Yi was her martial uncle, as a martial uncle, he could help Yang Liuqing rebel, but he couldn't help her give birth to a son. He only cared about how Yang Liuqing would ascend the throne, avenge her father and brother, and realize his long-cherished wish. As for who she would pass the throne to after she became the Empress, it was not something he, as a martial uncle, needed to worry about. Old Man Wang came with doubts and confusion. After Li Yi's guidance, he left with a happy face. After a while, Wei Liang and Chen Qing came again. For this martial nephew, Li Yi really worried a lot. Not only did he have to help her make a plan, but he also had to help her subordinates improve their ideological level. Wei Liang and Chen Qing were both former border generals, but guarding the border was different from rebelling. Li Yi needed to teach them how to start the first war, how to improve the military system, including how to expand the organization, how to do a good job in the United Front, and how to create a wave. Li Yi had always advocated that special people be used for special purposes, and the ideological work was handed over to Old Man Wang. He was very reassured. How to make nursery rhymes, how to stuff silk into a fish's stomach, how to write persuasion forms, he was definitely a professional. And Wei Liang and Chen Qing, their responsibilities were actually more important. How to develop their camp from 500 people to 50,000 people, how to fight every battle, how to defend every city, how to help the Empress clear all the obstacles along the way. Such a heavy burden would be on their shoulders. Unknowingly, they had talked for more than 2 hours. Li Yi waved his hand tiredly and said, "Let's stop here for today." When the two left, they bowed deeply to him. These days, what they learned from Jiang of Silla was enough to use for a lifetime. Li Yi leaned against the back of the chair, closed his eyes, and rested for a while. Although he was a little tired, it was worth it. Not to mention that he did all this to help his martial nephew, but also to satisfy some kind of complex in his heart. Moreover, Rui had become much gentler to him these days. It was all worth it. He leaned against the chair. After an unknown amount of time, a pair of hands appeared on his shoulders and began to gently press down. It was not Rui, Xiaohuan, or Ruoqing or any of them, only Rui would use such a jerky technique. He was in a dilemma. On one hand, he hoped that Rui would continue to be gentle, but on the other hand, he hoped that she would return to her original self. She was becoming less and less like herself. If she deliberately suppressed it, would she be unhappy? Of course, it was only out of concern for Rui, and not because he had some weird fetish or awakened some attribute that he shouldn't have awakened. At some point, Rui's hand on his shoulder paused and said, "Thank you." "Thank me for what?" Li Yi opened his eyes and asked in confusion. "Thank you for being willing to help her." "I'm helping her, why are you thanking me?" Mississippi Lu did not answer. Li Yi thought about it and waved his hand. He said, "Actually, it's not as complicated as you think. Think about it, if your disciple becomes the empress, you will be the empress's teacher, and I will be the empress's martial uncle. My seniority will be higher than the empress's, and it will be so prestigious." Mississippi Lu paused and asked, "You're doing this for this? What else could it be?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "Besides, if she becomes the empress, you will be the empress's teacher. At that time, even if Mingzhu really becomes the empress, won't you still be better than her?" Mississippi Lu frowned and said, "Even without this matter, I will still be better than her." There was no need for a family to be so calculative. Li Yi naturally would not mention that she had lost to Mingzhu in a duel. He shook his head and said, "Aren't I just adding flowers to brocade?" Mississippi Lu seemed to have thought of something and asked, "Since you helped Yang Liuqing to ascend the throne because you want to be the empress's martial uncle, then what did you want to do when you made Mingzhu the empress?" Li Yi closed his eyes and said, "I've been talking to them for too long. I'm a little sleepy. I'm going to sleep for a while." He was actually really sleepy, but the hands on his shoulders were getting stronger and stronger, making it hard for him to fall asleep. Tsang Province. Tsang Province was located at the northwest border of the Wu Kingdom. Although it was not considered a barren land, it was too far away from the imperial capital and bordered the fringe. From time to time, bandits would come out of the mountains to wreak havoc. For hundreds of years, the people of Tsang Province had been plagued by bandits. In the past 2 years, the bandits in the fringe had been eliminated, but the lives of the people had become even more difficult. Ever since the Wu Kingdom fell into chaos a few years ago, the imperial court had lost control of Tsang Province. In the past few years, Tsang Province had changed hands several times. First, a tyrant took advantage of the chaos in the country and attacked the provincial capital. He killed the provincial governor and his assistant officials and proclaimed himself king. Of course, they were annihilated by the imperial court a few months later. After that, Tsang Province was attacked by several other tyrant forces. The imperial court retreated and retreated. 2 years ago, Princess Duanrong used her iron fist to wipe out the rebellious forces in Tsang Province. She promulgated several policies to benefit the people, allowing the people of Tsang Province to have a short period of time to recuperate. Unfortunately, good times did not last long. Just a year ago, Princess Duanrong was besieged by the imperial court and several enlistment forces. After the defeat, there was no news of her. On the surface, Tsang Province had been reclaimed by the imperial court. However, with the imperial court's military strength, they were unable to suppress the rebellious forces that took advantage of the situation in the past year. The people suffered from the rebellious forces and their lives were extremely difficult. In a village several dozen miles away from Tsang Province's capital, a white-haired village chief was kneeling on the ground, tears streaming down his aged face. He pleaded, "Lord Steward, please give us a little more time. Please give us a few more days. 2 days ago, the village was robbed and we only have this little bit of food left. If you take this food away, we won't be able to survive." A middle-aged man dressed in a satin robe glanced at him and said coldly, "It's only right and proper to pay a debt. What does it have to do with me that you were robbed? I only know that if you can't pay the rent that you are supposed to pay, the master will punish me when I return. If I give you a little more time, who will give me a little more time?" He looked at the people behind him and said, "What are you waiting for? Take all the food away." The servants carried the sacks on their backs. Among the crowd below, more than 10 men dressed in coarse clothes had grief and indignation on their faces. However, they could only stand where they were, not daring to make any sudden movements. If they made a move on these people, the ones who would come knocking on their door tomorrow would be the constables of the government. Watching as the people carried the food onto the horse carriage, the middle-aged man looked down and frowned. "You've only paid less than 30% of the rent. I'll give you half a month's time. If you still can't pay after half a month, don't blame me for being impolite. Half a month. The village chief watched as the people carried the last of the village's food away. He collapsed on the ground with lifeless eyes and muttered, half a month, half a month. Half a month, everyone will starve to death. He sat on the ground and pointed at the sky as he cursed, damned heaven, you're not giving us a way out. You're sending us to our deaths. None of the villagers spoke. Their eyes were empty as they stared blankly in front of them. The autumn harvest had just ended, and all the food had been robbed by the bandits. Unable to pay the rent, the master had plundered all their food. There were nearly 100 mouths in this village, and they were about to run out of food. How could they survive until the next year? This King world doesn't give us a way out at all. How good would it be if Her Royal Highness was still here? Xiao Yun, Xiao Yun. The woman's panicked voice woke everyone up and they all looked in the direction of the voice. A 7 or 8-year-old girl with messy hair and ragged clothes was lying on the ground. The woman crouched on the ground and picked up the girl, shaking her in panic. Xiao Yun, what's wrong with you? The village chief crawled up from the ground and quickly walked over. He touched the girl's forehead and shook his head. This child has been sick for a few days. Hurry up and find a doctor. If we delay any longer, she'll die. The woman's face was filled with despair. They couldn't even eat, so where would they find the money to find a doctor? She hugged the girl and cried, Xiao Yun, I'm so sorry, sister-in-law, what happened? The woman raised her head when she heard the voice beside her. She saw a young man walking over from the side of the road. The young man walked to the woman's side and crouched down. He pinched the little girl's philtrum and she slowly regained consciousness. She looked at the woman and weakly said, Mother, I'm hungry. The woman hurriedly wiped her tears and said, Mother will go find something for you to eat. The young man took out a package from his bosom. After opening it, he took out a steamed bun and handed it to the little girl. Eat something first. The little girl was startled. The next moment, she took the steamed bun and wolfed it down. The young man turned back and said to the man with a Red Cross armband standing on the side of the road, This little girl is sick. Come and take a look at her. He looked at the woman and smiled. Don't worry, he's a doctor. All of this happened very quickly. The woman was stunned for a moment before she immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed to the young man a few times. She loudly said, Thank you for your great kindness. Thank you for your great kindness. The young man shook his head and smiled. There's no need to thank me. If you want to thank someone, thank the Heavenly Empress. Chapter 1078. The situation in Sangzhou had always been tense. Normally, when strangers passed by the village, if they stayed in the village for too long, they would be questioned. They had to be careful because there were too many precedents. If they were careless, it could lead to the destruction of the entire village. However, the people that appeared in the Dong family village today were not on guard. They were not people from the government, nor were they bandits that went down the mountain. Whether it was the government or bandits, they would not give the villagers free medical treatment, free medicine, or give their food to the villagers to eat. If these people were bad people, then they would want to meet bad people like them every day. The young man handed a few doses of medicine to the woman and said, Sister-in-law, this child only has a slight cold. Remember to boil 3 bowls of water into 1 bowl when you boil the medicine. He will be fine after drinking these medicines. We'll come back in 2 days. Thank you, benefactor, for saving our child. When the woman reached out to take the medicine, her eyes were filled with tears. She wanted to kneel down again, but the young man quickly helped her up. A man held his hand and firmly said, Benefactor's great kindness is something we cannot repay. As long as there is anything we can do, just say the word. I, Dong Dahai, will climb a mountain of swords or descend into a sea of flames without a frown. The young man smiled and shook his head. We are under the orders of the Empress of Heaven to relieve the suffering of the common people. This is a good deed. If we ask for something in return, wouldn't it damage the Empress of Heaven's merit? The man was stunned and asked, May I ask, benefactor, the Empress of Heaven that benefactor spoke of, a trace of respect appeared on the young man's face. He said, "The Empress of Heaven is the embodiment of kindness and benevolence. We have received the teachings of the Empress of Heaven to punish the strong and eliminate evil, to help the people of the world, to eliminate injustice, and to accumulate good fortune for the Empress of Heaven. Many thanks to the Empress of Heaven, many thanks to the Empress of Heaven." After the man heard this, he pulled the woman beside him to kneel down and respectfully kowtowed several times in a certain direction. After they stood up, the young man looked at him and asked, "I heard that there is a group of fierce bandits nearby. They rape and pillage and do all kinds of evil. We are under the orders of the Empress of Heaven to eliminate them. I wonder if you know where this one-eyed tiger bandit is now?" One-eyed tiger. When the man named Dong Dahai heard this name, he clenched his teeth and a look of hatred appeared on his face. He gritted his teeth and said, "A few days ago, it was them who rushed into the village and stole our food." The young man looked at him and asked, "So, you know where those people are?" "I know, of course I know." The man nodded, then shook his head. He looked at him and said anxiously, "Benefactor, you can't do this. One-eyed tiger has dozens of brothers under him, and each of them has extraordinary skills. Even the government can't do anything to them. If you go, you'll just be throwing your lives away." The young man didn't mind at all and said, "It's fine. You just need to tell me where the one-eyed tiger is." The man's expression changed for a while. A moment later, a trace of viciousness appeared in his eyes as he said, "Benefactor, you saved my family's Xiao Yun's life. If we don't have food, our family will starve to death." His gaze gradually became resolute as he said, "If you're going to find the one-eyed tiger, please bring me along." "Me too. Count me in. I'm going to die either way. Even if I die to the mountain patrol tiger, it's better than starving to death. At least, I can drag someone down with me before I die." More than 10 men rushed in from outside. They were all excited and stood behind Dong Dahai. There was not a single bit of food left in the village. After today, even if they were not killed by the bandits, they would slowly starve to death. Therefore, it was better to follow these people and fight for a chance of survival. In this world, one's life was determined by one's own effort. The young man looked at them and said, "Think about it carefully. If you go, there's a chance that you won't be able to return." The man standing in front of the group shook his head and said with a pitiful smile, "It's still better than starving to death." The village chief of the Dong family walked up to them unsteadily and said, "Even if Benefactor doesn't come, we'll still fight it out with them. Only by doing so will we have a chance of survival. If we don't, the whole village will die together." The young man pondered for a moment and did not refuse. He nodded and said, "Then let's go together." Over 10 strong young men of the Dong family took out hoes and shovels from their houses and carried them on their shoulders. Then, they followed the young man out of the Dong family village and headed in a certain direction aggressively. Who was not afraid of death? In the past, they would not even have the thought of resisting those bandits. However, it was different now. If they did not resist, they would starve to death. They had been forced into a dead end. They only had 2 choices, resist or die. If they did not want to die, they could only resist. Fortunately, they had helpers. These benefactors did not seem to be ordinary people. There were over 10 of them. Together with them, the number of people they had was not far behind the one-eyed tiger. Dong family village. For the survival of the entire village, all the strong young men of the village had been mobilized to fight the most powerful bandits in the vicinity. They swore that they would take back their food. The old, the weak, the women, and the children had all stayed in the village. They stood at the entrance of the village and looked in a certain direction silently. A young child curled up in his mother's arms. He raised his head and asked, "Mom, where did Dad and the others go?" The woman lowered her head and said softly, "Dad and the others went to find food for us. Once they find food, we won't have to starve anymore." Rui City. Li Yi looked down. Yang Luqing, Geezer Wang, Wei Liang, Chen Qing, and several deputies were all there. Even Mississippi Lu found a seat and sat at the back. He nodded, turned around, knocked on the blackboard, and said, "Now, let's start the class. Today, we'll talk about the timing of a rebellion." He cleared his throat and continued, "The timing of a rebellion is very important. Think about it. Has anyone in the Jing Kingdom rebelled now? No one dares to rebel in the Jing Kingdom. Why? Is it because the Jing Kingdom is strong, and the people live and work in peace and contentment? Is it because they have nothing better to do?" Wei Liang nodded thoughtfully. Li Yi pointed at him and said, "General Wei, answer me. Why hasn't anyone in the Qi Kingdom rebelled?" "Someone in the Qi Kingdom rebelled." Wei Liang thought for a while and said, "A few years ago, the first prince of the Qi Kingdom was bewitched by someone. He wanted to implement the Silver of Judgment law in the Qi Kingdom. The country was in turmoil. The officials of several states rebelled. It involved many people. Later, it was forcefully suppressed. Sit down." Li Yi glared at him and said, "The example of the Qi Kingdom's failed rebellion tells us that even a rebellion must be based on principles. When a country is still very strong, blindly rebelling will definitely pay a heavy price. The so-called timing of a rebellion is also the current situation. Several conditions must be met. The world is in chaos, the people have no way to make a living, the imperial court is not trustworthy, the rebels rise together. Obviously, this is the current situation of the Wu Kingdom." Later, Li Yi found that it was not easy to change their minds with just words on paper. Old Man Wang was an elite among scholars after all. But it was a bit difficult for generals like Wei Liang and Chen Qing to understand. However, they should understand these things the most. Therefore, he could only return to his old business and set up a small Jiang of Silla class. He taught them for an hour every day. Judging from the effect of the lectures these days, the effect was not bad. He looked at the people below who had a look of realization on their faces and spoke again. "Before a rebellion, you need to understand the main contradiction of a region. Is it the people and the government, the people and the gentry, or the people and the bandits? Only after you understand the main contradiction can you know what to do next. Only then can you gradually strengthen your troops." Zhangzhou, Dong Village. A group of old, weak women and children quietly waited at the entrance of the village until the sun was about to set. Suddenly, a loud voice shouted, "They're back! They're back!" Everyone's spirits rose. When they looked up, they saw a group of people walking over from afar. They saw their men and sons walking into the village in high spirits. Their faces were full of smiles, and each of them carried a big cloth bag on their shoulders. Chapter 1079. The villagers of the Dong family village entered the village and placed the food on their backs in an orderly manner at the village entrance. The young man walked out from the crowd and said, "This food was brought back by everyone risking their lives. Everyone can take it and divide it among yourselves." The dozens of men standing behind him revealed looks of shame as they heard this. These food were taken from the hands of bandits, but they weren't the ones who took it. They were just standing on the sidelines watching the fun, cheering and cheering. When they arrived, they were already prepared to perish together with the bandits. But after arriving, they discovered that One-Eyed Tiger's group of several dozen people wasn't even enough to fight against their benefactor. They couldn't even help. In the end, they could only help their benefactor tie up those bandits. It was unknown where those bandits were taken. The man named Dong Dahai carried several bags of food and placed them to the side. He said, "Benefactor, this is enough for us. If we take more, it will still be taken by others. You can take the rest of the food away." The young man waved his hand and said, "This is your food to begin with. We can't take it. After you take it back, hide it well and don't let others steal it." The Dong family village people lowered their heads in silence. In times of chaos and natural disasters, food was their life. The government wanted food, their families wanted food, and the bandits on the mountain also wanted food. These people wanted their lives. But today, these strangers that they didn't know treated their illness and helped them steal food from the hands of bandits without asking for anything in return. Dong Dahai was the first to kneel on the ground, knocking his head on the ground. The two men beside him looked at each other and knelt down as well. The villagers of the Dong family village knelt down one by one. Whether they were men or women, young or old, or even the ignorant children, all of them had their heads pressed down by their mothers. The young man stood in front and said, "You don't need to thank me. If you want to thank someone, thank the Heavenly Empress. Remember to live a good life in the future. Don't do evil and do more good deeds. The Heavenly Empress will protect you. If you disobey, we will take back everything that the Heavenly Empress has bestowed upon you." Dong Dahai respectfully said, "Benefactor, rest assured. We will not harm the Heavenly Empress merit." The villagers of the Dong family village also responded. Even after those people gradually left, the villagers were still kneeling on the ground. They looked at the piles of food around them and felt that it was unreal. Dong Dahai took out a portrait from his bosom. This was something that he had requested from his benefactors. This portrait was of the Heavenly Empress. They were only ordinary people and could not do anything for the Heavenly Empress. They could only worship the Heavenly Empress day and night in order to repay her kindness. From today onwards, not only him, but everyone in the Dong village would have to erect a long life memorial tablet for the goddess. Recently, a legend had been circulating outside Sangzhou City. The Wu Kingdom was in chaos, and the people had no way to make a living. The people suffered from the chaos of war and were homeless. The Empress took pity on the people and descended to the mortal world. She sent her believers to help the people in distress and in danger. She helped the people in Sang Prefecture to treat their illnesses for free and gave them vegetarian meals. Many people were saved. There were common people that had received their kindness and willingly joined them. They swept away the bandits that roamed Sang Prefecture and distributed the food they seized to the poor people. In a short period of time, they received the unanimous support of the local people. The Heavenly Empress had a benevolent and generous heart. She spread the word of good in the world and also guided the people of Tsang Prefecture to do good deeds and accumulate good karma. She also left behind a prophecy that not long after, a person of the mandate of heaven would appear and save the people of Tsang Prefecture from their misery. In these past years, the common people heard countless people proclaim themselves as people of the mandate of heaven. Without exception, these people were all exterminated by the imperial court. These people said that they would help the common people, but they actually stole food from the common people and went around capturing people. A long time ago, the people of Tsang Prefecture no longer had any expectations for this so-called person of the mandate of heaven. However, the Heavenly Empress was different. She never desired anything from the common people. She filled the stomachs of the common people and cured their illnesses. The common people believed in her and supported her. When she said that a person of the mandate of heaven would come and save them from their misery, many common people longed for the arrival of this person. Tsang Prefecture City, Provincial Governor's Mansion. A person of the mandate of heaven? The Tsang Prefecture's provincial governor slammed the table and said with dissatisfaction, investigate thoroughly for this official, find out who this group of people is." With such a force appearing outside of Tsang Prefecture City, as the provincial governor, he naturally could not let his guard down. The situation in Tsang Prefecture was chaotic enough. He was the provincial governor in name, but he could only do as he pleased in the prefecture city. Once he left the prefecture city, he would be restricted by those powerful people. It wasn't easy for the imperial court to take down Tsang Prefecture. If there were any unforeseen events here and a few more rebels were born, this provincial governor who hadn't been a provincial governor for long would most likely meet his end. This so-called holy religion that led people to do good must be nipped in the bud. After finishing this matter, he still had to think of a way to find Princess Duanrong's whereabouts. His Majesty had sent him several secret letters, ordering him to find Princess Duanrong at all costs. Unfortunately, the fringe was easy to enter but hard to leave. If he couldn't send troops in, where would he find her? Unless Princess Duanrong could walk out of the fringe on her own and stand before him, he didn't think such a pie falling from the sky would happen to him. In the fringe, Li Yi had just sent off Yang Liuqing and his entourage. In the end, what was learned on paper was still shallow. Rebellion was not something that could be accomplished with words alone. He had already taught them everything that needed to be taught. It was time for them to put it into practice. Tsang Prefecture was the closest to the fringe. It was a place that they had to fight for. Once they conquered and stabilized Tsang Prefecture, the fringe would become their stable support. As long as the imperial court of the Wu Kingdom hadn't swept away all the obstacles in the Wu Kingdom, they would be invincible. They had just set off today, but the arrangements in Tsang Prefecture had already begun several months ago. The holy religion wanted to establish a branch in the Wu Kingdom. Su Zheng couldn't wait to personally lead his men there. The philosophy of the holy religion had long changed to that of helping the needy. They recruited a portion of the people, wiped out the small gangs of bandits in Tsang Prefecture, and distributed all the food and belongings they obtained. Of course, they weren't doing this out of selfishness. There was a difference in the treatment between the followers of the holy religion and the common people. In just a few short months, their troops grew from less than 100 people to a terrifying number. And those bandits and tyrants were all brought into the fringe and turned into productive forces. In these 2 months, Li Yi also deeply understood why the countless rebellious bandits in history would first establish their own religion before they rebelled: a rebellious disciple, a protective master, a lunatic who only wanted to strengthen the holy religion and spread its teachings, and a group of martial arts experts who had long been trained to the point of wanting to see the world plunged into chaos. With Tsang Prefecture as the starting point, who knew how much chaos they would stir in the Wu Kingdom in the end? Li Duan ran over from afar and ran to his side. He asked, "Daddy, Daddy, have Auntie and senior sister left?" Li Yi nodded and said, "Let's go." Li Duan heaved a sigh of relief and murmured, "They're finally gone." Li Yi patted his head and asked, "Are you happy that Auntie and senior sister left?" "If I don't train properly, Auntie will spank Dwayner's butt." Li Duan rubbed his butt and said excitedly, "I'm going to play with little sister and Auntie." Li Duan's fear of Rui was innate. Now that Rui had left with them, he could completely let go of himself. Li Yi looked down the mountain. The path down the mountain twisted and turned until it disappeared into the shade of a forest. Somewhere in the mountains ahead, a troop of nearly 1,000 people was moving slowly. Wei Liang gripped the saber in his hand tightly. The saber was so sharp that it could cut through iron like mud. It was the first time in his life that a troop of 500 soldiers was equipped with such a divine weapon. Apart from that, they were also equipped with the heavenly punishment that struck terror in the hearts of countless people on the battlefield. It was an invincible weapon for sieging cities and killing enemies. However, this was just a precaution. The mission given to them by Prince Jiang of Silla was to take down Tsang Prefecture within a month without shedding a drop of blood. He looked up in a certain direction and clenched his fists. "Tsang Prefecture. We're back." Chapter 1080. We haven't eaten for 3 days. Be kind and give us something to eat. Have pity on us. Outside of Tsangzhou City, in a tea house by the side of the official road, a dozen or so refugees, dressed in rags and covered in dust, were leaning against a low mud wall. They held a broken bowl in their hands and weakly repeated the same words. Tsangzhou had always been in turmoil. Some of the commoners had lost their homes and were living a difficult life. They could only flee in all directions. Refugees like this were a common sight along the official road. The teahouse's waiter was annoyed by the noise. He walked over with large strides and kicked one of the people by the wall. He said angrily, "Go away, go away. Don't disturb our business." This teahouse was opened by the side of the official road. Because of the bandits nearby, they hadn't opened for business for half a year. A few days ago, those bandits were taken care of by someone. They only dared to open the tea house again after observing for a long time. However, these refugees, who couldn't be chased away, were lying there like mud, affecting their business. They are all pitiful people. Why make things difficult for them? In the tea house, a man couldn't stand it anymore. He took out a few pieces of dry rations from his bag and distributed them to the refugees. He pointed in a certain direction and said, "Follow this official road and walk another 30 li forward. There is a village called Dong Village. Go there and do some work. At the very least, you will be able to make a living." It is still early, so don't delay on the road. You should arrive before the sky turns dark. Thank you, thank you. The group of refugees immediately knelt down and kowtowed to express their gratitude. After a few kowtows, they got up and walked in the direction that the man had pointed. The waiter was happy to see this. He shook his head and went back to his work. The man also sat back down. A person sitting beside him suddenly asked in a low voice, "General Wei, it's already so late. Why isn't General Fan here yet? Did something go wrong?" Wei Liang drank a cup of tea and said, "What's the hurry? There are still 15 minutes. Blind Fan always delays things to the last moment. Wei, I heard you bad-mouthing me from afar. I haven't seen you for more than a year and you've only gained this bit of skill." A loud voice came from outside the door. A man walked in and sat across from Wei Liang. This man was tall and mighty. One of his eyes was blind, and a knife scar ran diagonally through his eye, making him look somewhat terrifying. Behind him, there were more than 10 people on horseback. A murderous aura spread out, causing the few people in the shop to feel nervous. Wei Liang glanced at him and said lightly, "I haven't seen you for more than a year. Blind Fan, you've become more capable. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that you're a bandit from somewhere." The waiter of the tea house walked over nervously and asked in a trembling voice, "Sir, what would you like to order?" Wei Liang placed a few coins on the table and said to the one-eyed man, "Let's talk outside." The group walked out of the tea house and went down the official road. They walked straight into a forest not far away. Wei Liang stopped in his tracks. The people behind him dismounted their horses and knelt on one knee. They said loudly, "Greetings, General Wei." Wei Liang waved his hand and they immediately stood up. The one-eyed man took a step forward and asked in a deep voice, "Where's the princess?" "Her Highness has arrived at Sung Prefecture." Wei Liang looked at him and said, "When we were suppressing the bandits, we heard that there was a powerful blind guy who occupied a mountain a year ago and subdued all the forces within a 30-mile radius. We guessed that it was you." The one-eyed man nodded and asked again, "The people of Tsang Prefecture are saying that His Highness King Jing was assassinated. Is this true?" Wei Liang nodded and did not deny it. The one-eyed man's expression changed. "Then His Highness," Wei Liang waved his hand. "Just treat it as if His Highness King Jing is already dead." The one-eyed man took a few steps back and said in shock, "Then we're, even if King Jing is dead, we still have the princess." Wei Liang looked at him and said, "Do you think that Her Highness is not as good as King Jing?" The one-eyed man wanted to say something, but Wei Liang waved his hand and said, "If there's anything, we'll talk when we see the princess." Some people let go of their horses and rode with the people beside them. Wei Liang and a few of his subordinates got on their horses and rode on the official road. The group of people galloped away, kicking up a cloud of dust. In a remote village in a county in Tsang Prefecture, the horses stopped in front of the village entrance. The one-eyed man dismounted and looked into the village with an excited expression. Wei Liang looked at him and said, "Let's go." "Greetings, Her Highness." A moment later, in the courtyard of a house in the village, the one-eyed man knelt on one knee. The muscles on his face trembled and he could not control his excitement. "Get up." Yang Liuqing smiled and said, "General Fan has worked hard for the past year." After the one-eyed man stood up, he shook his head and said, "As long as Her Highness is fine, it's not hard for me." He also met a few deputy generals that he was familiar with and Prime Minister Wang. Before he had time to rest, he was pulled aside by Wei Liang. "Didn't you want to ask about His Highness King Jing?" Wei Liang looked at him and said, "Indeed, King Jing is not dead, but he can no longer support our great cause." After a moment, the one-eyed man came back to his senses. He sighed and said, "I've been worried about this for a long time, but I didn't expect that even Prime Minister Wang wouldn't be able to let King Jing walk the right path." After saying that, he looked at Wei Liang with bright eyes and asked, "What you said just now, is it true? Her Highness really plans to rise up?" Wei Liang looked at him and asked, "What do you think?" A sneer appeared on the one-eyed man's face and he said, "Except for Her Highness, I won't listen to anyone." Wei Liang nodded, but the one-eyed man looked at the thing hanging in front of his chest and asked, "What is this?" Wei Liang took the third eye given to him by Jiang of Silla and handed it to the one-eyed man. The one-eyed man held it in his hand and looked at it for a long time until Wei Liang taught him how to use it. He opened a small lid and brought it close to his eyes. He could even see the expressions of people a few hundred steps away. This is the monocular of the Jing Kingdom. He looked at Wei Liang and said in shock, "This thing is hard to buy. Where did you get it? What is this?" Wei Liang looked at him with some disdain and said, "Lend me your saber." A vigilant expression appeared on the one-eyed man's face and he asked, "What do you want my saber for?" "We are friends, but I won't give it to you. We haven't seen each other for a long time. Let me broaden my horizons." Wei Liang shook his head and said, "Don't worry, I don't want your things." Since Wei Liang said so, the one-eyed man had no choice but to untie the long saber at his waist. Wei Liang held it with one hand and pulled out the saber at his waist with the other. After a few sounds of metal clashing, a few cracks appeared on the one-eyed man's saber. Under the one-eyed man's incredulous gaze, he handed his saber to him and said, "It's just a pile of scrap metal. Don't say it's a saber. This saber is for you. Don't embarrass Her Highness when you go out." The one-eyed man held the saber in his hand tightly and looked at it carefully. He raised his head to look at Wei Liang and asked seriously, "Tell me honestly, what happened in the past year?" Wei Liang smiled and said, "Come here, I'll show you something good." The two of them walked into a house. When they came out again, the expression on the one-eyed man's face could no longer be described as just shock. Fa. He looked at Wei Liang and took a deep breath. After a long time, he asked, "Damn it, tell me honestly, did you guys steal these things from the Jing Kingdom?" Without waiting for Wei Liang to answer, he revealed an excited expression and said, "With these things, what do we have to be afraid of? There are less than 2,000 soldiers guarding Sangzhou. With your people, my people, and these Fa, we can take Sangzhou by tomorrow night." "Take Sangzhou?" Wei Liang looked at him and asked, "What happens after we take Sangzhou?" "Of course we keep fighting forward." The one-eyed man looked at him and said, "With Fa, what do we have to be afraid of?" Wei Liang looked at him and suddenly asked, "Do you know what the main contradiction is and what the secondary contradiction is?" The one-eyed man was startled. He picked his ear and asked doubtfully, "What? Do you know what a unified mind is and what a united front is? Do you know how to establish a revolutionary base, how to fight the agrarian revolutionary war, how to mobilize the strength of the people, how to do diplomatic work and united front work?" The one-eyed man was startled and asked, "What are these?" "You don't know anything. You only know how to fight and kill." Wei Liang looked at him in disdain. He vented the anger that had been in his chest for a long time and asked, "Are you a pig?" You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.